participants in the room. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to wait a few more moments to get everyone online. All right, I think we're all here. I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I apologize. It is 9:08. I apologize for the late start. We had some technical difficulties, but we are up and running now. So welcome back. Good morning. I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. It is November 8th, 2023, and this is our second day of the hearing on the pending petition for change by the City of Solvang for water right permit 15878, which authorizes diversions of water from the Santa Ynez River in Santa Barbara County. This hearing is being held in accordance with the amended notice of public hearing dated August 15th, 2023, and the notice of additional days of public hearing and procedural ruling dated October 26th. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording along with the Zoom-generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time today you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us, as always, please email the AHO at admin@hrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. The AHO staff will be there monitoring that email inbox. Assisting me today are several staff of the Administrative Hearings Office. We have Skylar Anderson, Kyle Wooldridge, and we have Nicole Mullen today. So it will be Ms. Mullen who will be handling slides and screen sharing in our proceeding. So please feel free to our witnesses, please feel free to ask Ms. Mullen to forward to your next slide when you're ready in your presentation. And attorneys, you may ask Ms. Mullen directly to bring up a particular exhibit when you're ready for that. If at any time I am experiencing technical difficulties during the hearing and I'm not able to rejoin within a few minutes, one of my staff will call a recess until I'm able to rejoin you. Hopefully that won't happen. As we did on Monday, we will take breaks, we'll take a lunch break, and we will plan for a hard stop at 5 p.m. later today. I wasn't planning to go through appearances again. I was going to carry those over, but what I would like to do is look to the room and see if we have anyone joining us other than our witnesses who has not had a chance to introduce themselves and was not with us on Monday. Do we have anyone new with me on the Zoom? I'm scanning the room. I don't see anyone new.
Joe Gibson here. I was not available on Monday, so I'm joining today.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Thank you for joining us. I think on that note, actually, this is timely. I was going to look to the City of Solvang. I think where we left off on Monday was finishing cross-examination of Mr. Nicely. If I remember correctly, Mr. Puccini was in the middle of, or significant way through his cross-examination of Mr. Nicely when we stopped for the day. Based on that, I was considering whether or not we should defer Mr. Gibson's testimony and cross-examination until later to make sure we could get through the entities for the for CDFW, CalTrout, and NIMS during this week. And if we needed to, we could return to Mr. Gibson on November 29th. But I wanted to look to the attorneys whether you have, and my anticipation is that there'll be a substantial amount of cross-examination for Mr. Gibson. That may or may not be true. but I was considering deferring that. So I wanted to look to the room to see if that anyone had any comments on that proposed approach that we would wrap up with Mr. Nicely, move to the fish entities witnesses in the order that they proposed, and then come back to Mr. Gibson as we are able to on Thursday, or defer over to November 29th.
So, Ms. Kenzie, I can only speak for CCRB. I
Right.
will say that my cross-examination of Mr. Gibson will be considerably shorter than the other cross-examinations I've conducted during this hearing. Can't speak for what CDFW or the agencies will do, but that's my position.
That's helpful. Thank you. Well, maybe let's I don't know. Solvang, do you have a preference on this? I'll look to Mr. Kim. I see you. You are off mute.
Yes, well, so Tilden Kim for Solvang. Ms. O'Sullivan will be defending Mr. Gibson, and I know that Mr. Gibson has some timing issues, so I would defer to them in terms of priorities and sequence.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. The city's preference would be to try to get through Mr. Gibson's testimony today, since there's some continuity with having all of our witnesses in a row.
Here, I'm trying not to. Yeah, I don't want to make this unnecessarily difficult.
Yeah, so. I mean, I will say that as far as what's remaining on Mr. Nicely's testimony, the fisheries agencies, I believe, were pretty close to their, the allotted time. Though I know you were willing to be a little flexible on that. And my redirect so far, based on the questions so far, should be fairly quick.
Okay, that's helpful. Let's give it a shot then. Let's finish with Mr. Nicely, and we'll go forward with Mr. Gibson. That sounds good to me. We will proceed that way. And then with that, is there anything else we should talk about before I hand things over back to Mr. Puccini for just a few more questions, and then we move to Caltrout and nymphs for cross-examination of Mr. Nicely?
Just very quickly, my colleague from NOAA General Counsel is on today and was not joining us yesterday, and I think we missed that one moment. So Mary, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Mary? Oh, maybe she's planning to do that.
I see her online, but is on mute. Well, when she's available, she can introduce herself. But I see we have her here.
Okay, otherwise, yes, we were all here.
Great, thank you. And I'm scanning my virtual room for Mr. Nicely. I see Mr. Nicely now at the bottom of my screen. Thank you. With that, then I will turn things over. Welcome back, Mr. Nicely. Just to refresh your memory, do you recall taking the oath with respect to your testimony when we were together on Monday?
Good morning, and yes, I do. It was, yeah.
Great, thank you. And with that, I will hand things over back to you, Mr. Puccini. You may finish your cross-exam.
I appreciate that. Good morning, Mr. Nicely.
Good morning, Mr. Puccini.
Just another handful of questions. Just getting to it. You recall that in your direct testimony on page 25, around line 28, you stated that the previous analysis included a transmissivity value of 180,000 gallons per day per foot. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can we put up CDFW 85, please? And can we just move it up a little bit so we can see the box that reads water level and yield of completed well? That's perfect. Thank you. Mr. Nicely, you're familiar with a well that's referred to as Sci Water 1111?
Yeah, that was referred to, if I recall, in Mr. sorry if I mispronounced your name, Mr. Demuja's testimony.
It's Demuha, but thank you.
Demuha, great, thank you. In his testimony, and I was not aware of it before that. So
okay, yeah. And since you mentioned his testimony, he also mentioned that there was a new well that was constructed near this water 111. Do you recall that testimony from him?
I do.
Okay. Are you familiar with the document on the screen? It's a well completion report on Form DWR 188.
Yeah, and this is the document I was referring to that I wasn't aware of beforehand, but I am familiar with it now. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll represent to you that this is the well completion report for the well that Mr. Demuha describes in his testimony as being near the side water 1111. Is that agreeable?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So if we look at the water level and yield of completed well, you see the line that says estimated yield at 260 GPM.
I do. Yeah.
And you also see next to that, the total drawdown is 49 feet.
Yeah. We all know what the drawdown means.
Okay, great. So if I wanted to calculate what I think in your jargon is a specific capacity, I can do that using these two numbers, correct?
Correct. To be clear, it's the drawdown, the pumping rate in gallons per minute divided by the total drawdown in feet.
Okay. And you may not have a calculator, but if I represented to you that math comes out to 5.3, would you agree with that?
Right now, and I get 5.3.
Terrific. So let's see. That means then that, my notes here. Would that mean that every time you draw a foot of water from that well, the drawdown goes down 5.3 feet?
Well, at the pumping rate of 260 gallons a minute, it goes down 49 feet after 6 hours of pumping. I don't
Okay.
know what it would do at 1 gallon a minute, but I think we're on the same page.
Okay. Right. So every time I'm pumping a foot of water from the well, I get another 5.3 GPM, right?
That's how that works. Yeah.
Okay. If I wanted to determine how that specific capacity translates to transmissivity, there's a method for that, correct?
There is a rule of thumb for that, which is a shortcut, which is often used. Correct.
Okay. Would that be, would I do that calculation based on what you just said? I would multiply 5.3 by 1500.
The rule is, just to be clear, we're talking about a method that is used by hydrogeologists that's in a book I have on my shelf here, Groundwater and Wells Johnson. It's one of the
Exactly.
appendices, and it's used by a multiplier of either 1500 or 2000.
Okay.
To estimate transmissivity.
Okay, thank you. My understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you use that number 1500, it's an assumption of an ideal aquifer and an ideal Tice drawdown. Does that sound familiar?
I could look at it in the book, but I don't recall what the assumptions are. That are in there, and the single page in the appendix of that book that refers to this method.
Okay. Well, let's go with what we have. Let's take the number 1500.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I would recommend we typically use 2000 as the rule of thumb, but 1500 is, if you want to use that, that's acceptable.
Okay, let's go with 1500 just to make the point. So if I multiply 5.3 by 1500, I get 8,000 gallons per day per foot. In terms of transmissivity, would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's right, which are not the same units as we've been using in our document, to be clear.
Okay, but you did for the 180,000 number, you said gallons per day per foot, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so when we say 5.3 by 1500, and that comes out to 8,000, that's also in gallons per day per foot, correct?
I would need to look at the reference on my shelf to make sure.
Okay. Since you can't say for sure, we'll just take this, let's say, as a hypothetical. But I will represent to you as we speak that, in fact, the 5.3 by 1500 equals 8,000. That it does come out to 8,000 gallons per day per foot, and that would be my transmissivity value, correct?
Yeah, and I would just caution that it could be off by a factor of 7.48 to convert from those units to the ones that we use, but it sounds correct.
Thank you. So if you ended up using this number, 8,000 gallons, would your estimate of drawdown in your testimony change?
Of course.
Would it change up or down?
Would what change up or down? Can we be clear?
Would the drawdown number that you estimated go up or down?
So lower transmissivities will lead to more drawdown.
Okay, so this is a lower number than 180,000, so we can assume that there would be a higher drawdown, correct?
This is a single data point, and if it was valid for the entire area, then it would indeed do that. Yeah.
Okay. But again, your testimony is that that it would be 180,000 gallons per day. So my calculation is that 8,000 compared to your 180,000 is roughly about 5% of the drawdown that, 5% of the 180,000 number that you assumed, for a point of reference. It's obviously lower than 180,000, correct?
Where'd you get the 5%? One more time.
It's just simply 8,000 gallons compared to your 180,000 gallons per day per foot is roughly 5% of that 180,000. In other words, it's a much lower number than the one.
If that number is that much lower, I would consider this an outlier because of all of the body of evidence for the transmissivity in this area that goes back to the original Santiago hydrologic model, which was started in 1979, and all of the body of evidence that has been used in this area. And all the workers in the area. But so I would just put it in context of the overall understanding of the geology that number 5% would be extremely low.
Okay, and again, my only point is that 8,000 gallons per day per foot compared to 180,000 gallons per day per foot is roughly 5% of that 180,000. All I'm trying to say is it's a lower number, which I think we can agree to. Yes. Okay, and let's see, really quickly. Give me 1 second, sorry about that. So if we were to pump 460 gallons per minute at one of the wells in well site B, okay, and I divided 460 by 5.3, the value we talked about, the drawdown would be, for my calculation, about 87 feet. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, it sounds like the math works. It is surprisingly, it's a surprising amount of drawdown for a well in this area.
But in your, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly where this is, but there was somewhere in your testimony, I thought that you described the thickness of the alluvium at the well site B location to be anywhere from 40 to 70 feet, right?
Right, but this here shows that it's much, much thicker, right? 47% thicker.
Yeah. But if the drawdown based on this 460 by 5.3 calculation is 87 feet, that's obviously below the 40 to 70 foot estimated thickness of the aquifer at this location, correct?
Well, no, what you have on screen, I disagree. What you have on screen shows that the aquifer is as thick as 118 feet, from 0 to 118 feet thick.
Gotcha. Let's look at that really quickly. You're referring to the geologic log box.
Correct.
Where would you draw the line with those 6 rows to demarcate the bottom of the underflow aquifer to the groundwater table, or the groundwater aquifer, I should say?
No, there's no groundwater aquifer shown here. This log shows a mixture of materials, all of which are the alluvium, that go all the way down to what's called here bedrock shale. I presume that's the Monterey Formation, which is not a bedrock aquifer. I'm sorry, not an uplands aquifer, but is hard rock, right? So based on this, it would seem that most of this is coarse material, by which I mean sands and gravels, and generally goes from 0 to 118 feet.
That then would be different than the assumption I believe you made, and perhaps Stetson made as well, that the thickness of the underflow aquifer at this location is somewhere between 40 and 70 feet. I mean, obviously, 118 to 120 is thicker than that, correct?
118, not 120, 118. Yeah, it is. I was limiting my discussion to my initial testimony, Solvang 5, and my discussion of a thicker aquifer was something I was going to discuss in the end of November in my Solvang 171 rebuttal testimony.
Okay. If we were to look at, if we were to say, for example, based on what you had said in your testimony, I think what Stetson said as well, that the estimate thickness of that underflow aquifer is a maximum of 70 feet, again, 40 to 70 feet. And then you look at this geologic log and you see perhaps as deep as 118, there's some uncertainty, it seems to me, about what the overall thickness of the underflow aquifer is. I mean, would that be a fair statement?
I would say there's some uncertainty, but it seems like it can't be shallower than this well log. If this well log is accurate, then the uncertainty is whether it's even deeper than what we thought. It could be, it is 70 to 80 feet deep, or as this shows nearby, even deeper. So the aquifer would be even thicker, which would lead to the ramifications of which we can discuss.
If you wanted to deal with what I'm describing as uncertainty, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm using the term uncertainty. Would one way to sort of get to the bottom of it be to do, say, a pump test or have some kind of monitoring in place?
I see. So this pumping test that's shown here, where in the box it says water level and what could get yield of completed well, is a pumping test. These are short-term pumping tests that are required to be done for this purpose, but they are oftentimes useful, sometimes not so much. There's no law that requires a geologist or hydrogeologist or any kind of other qualified person to be on site for the preparation of this. It is done by the well driller, and it is done, and they put a number on a field, and then it's submitted. I don't believe that geologists are needed to be on site to oversee these. Now, with that, pumping tests are useful. Pumping tests for the whole area have been summarized in a report that was not part of my testimony. And the hydraulic conductivity value that's used typically is based on those outside of this single point. And they vary from 300 to 600. One estimate had a hydraulic conductivity of, which is a different unit. But just for reference, hydraulic conductivity and transmissivity are related. But the hydraulic conductivity that we used is 300 feet per day. Okay. The range, I'm sorry for interrupting. The range is 300 to 600. And in one summary table I've seen, it shows a value of up to 1,000. And I think that's a little high. I'm not sure I believe the 1,000 value, but our use of 300 to 600 matches the long history of records that are outside of this one well log.
Did you, in your testimony and in terms of validating the Stetson analysis and so forth, did you somehow rely on that information, or are you just saying there's other information out there that, is useful as to this particular line of questioning?
So to answer that, I would have to mention things that are outside of the specific document of Stetson Tech Memo 6. But as I referred to on Monday, there are about 5 models of the area, right? Or there have been historically about 5 groundwater models of the area, and all of them use a value that's much higher than the value that we're talking about, which would be the result of the single pumping log.
Okay, but that, just to be clear, that is not reflected in any respect in your direct testimony in this matter, is that correct?
Good question. I think it was. just trying to determine where. It was, and if it wasn't directly, it was definitely referred to as, yeah, there it is. On paragraph 64, the the transmissivity value that you referred to of 180,000 gallons per day per foot is referred to.
Okay, but as we just went through, that's a very stark contrast between the little calculation we went through based on this particular document, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Okay, and just really to be really clear, I mean, a well completion report, you know, the pump test as you just described it in this report, that's something that is always done when a well is being constructed, correct? I mean, this is the reason we have this report.
Yeah, the owner of the well wants confidence that their well will produce water, and that's one purpose of this, maybe the primary purpose of doing that.
But it nonetheless yields the data, obviously, that we just went through with the estimated yield and total drawdown and so forth, correct?
It does yield the data of questionable quality in the eyes of most geologists.
Okay, but nonetheless, you would say that it is at least a point of data that could be looked to when you're trying to determine transmissivity in a specific well location, correct?
Sure, but it shouldn't be taken in a vacuum.
Okay.
It is, as you said, a point of reference among many.
If someone presented to you the calculation we just went through and said, hey, you got a value of 8,000, you got a value of 180,000, would that give you some concern, that huge gap?
It would give me it would give me concern about the quality of the well that was installed at this point, based on the body of evidence for typical values in other wells in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're saying. Thank you. And do you have any idea whether or not that's in the TM number 6 referenced or had anything to say about this particular data point in the well completion report?
No, this postdates Tech Memo 6. It postdates most of that. If you were to scroll up, the date of this is very recent.
Yes, and I would note that it looks like it's in early 2020. So that, like you said, postdates the analysis that Stetson completed. So he would not have had this information, or I should say they would not have had this information at the time, correct?
Yeah, this was not included in the Santinez River hydrologic model. It's not included in the Riverware model, and it's not included in their Tech Memo 6, which includes two of those, or one of those, and a TICE model. That's right.
Thank you. If Solvang were to conduct pumping tests for the 2 proposed Site B wells, would they need monitoring wells to measure the drawdown at a distance in order to calculate transmissivity? Sorry, flubbing that word, transmissivity and storativity.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time? Broke up a little bit. Sorry.
I apologize. So if Solvang were to conduct pumping tests on these 2 proposed Site B wells to measure drawdown, in order to measure drawdown at a distance, let me restate that, excuse me. If Solvang conducted pumping tests on the 2 proposed Site B wells, they would need monitoring wells to measure drawdown at a distance in order to calculate transmissivity and storativity. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we went over this a little bit on Monday. Yeah.
That was so long ago. Thank you. And then if these, in your opinion, should these monitoring wells be placed to the south of the 2 proposed wells near the river or north of the wells near the underflow boundary? What would be the better location for these monitoring wells?
To be clear, usually we don't have the benefit of deciding where a monitoring well is installed, but instead we use existing wells, which are these existing wells around there as monitoring wells. The location of which is usually dictated by the existing wells. But to answer your question, I haven't considered where the location of monitoring wells, if they were to be installed with this, which hasn't, this is the first time this has been discussed, where those would be installed.
But, and you mentioned that you might rely on other wells. That could include Sci Water 1111, correct?
Yeah, it could involve, it could include any of the production wells around the area, as long as the owners of these wells, operators of the wells, were amenable and interested in not pumping their wells during our pumping test, which are two hurdles that are often we could accommodate those in most cases.
Okay. And in addition to the Sci Water 1111, another well in the vicinity that could be relied on is the very well we've been discussing. That's the subject of the well completion report, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't have many more questions, Ms. Kenzie, so bear with me. Thank you. When you did your refined TICE image well analysis, can you remind me, if I haven't asked, how many image wells did you use?
Right. So the use of TICE analysis involves placing of an equal number of wells outside of the basin. So each well had an image well outside of the area. So because there were 2 wells, there were a total of 4 image wells to mimic this pumping.
Okay. And so I think what you said is you used two image wells for each of the site B wells. Is that correct?
That's
Or total?
correct.
And then was it one each for the northern and southern boundaries?
That's right, for the boundaries of the alluvium,
Okay,
not
thank
of the river. But
you. Okay. It could the location of those image wells be placed on a map or figure like Solvang 18, for example?
they could. Well, Stetson did not provide us the locations of the image wells. We likewise did not, because the locations are dictated by the geology.
Okay.
Yep.
When you calculated the total drawdown at the 4 drawdown lines that are shown on Solvang 18, which I presume you recall, did you determine that total drawdown by summing the individual drawdowns from each of the proposed site B wells and each image well based on the distance between the well and the drawdown line?
Yes, that's right. To be clear, the drawdown lines are affected by the pumping of both wells collectively and all 4 image wells to mimic the geologic edges of the basin.
Okay. And then when you calculated the total drawdown at those 4 drawdown lines that are shown on Solvang 18, did you use the same transmissivity value and storativity value as the Site B production wells?
Correct. Stetson Tech Memo 6 talks about the aquifer properties on page 7 of their document, and we used the same values that they used.
Okay. And then could you create a table that lists the 4 Solvang 18 drawdown line values, showing their transmissivity, storativity, distances to each production image well, and the resulting TICE drawdowns for each well?
I'm sorry, did you say could we?
Yes.
Sure,
Can a table be created? Okay.
The values for the transmissivity would be the same for all of them, and I'm not sure what would be in the table, frankly. But
okay, okay, that's fine. I don't need to go on with that one. Okay. In your opinion, is the depth to underflow, and this is at the well site B location, is the depth to underflow already in a condition that's too deep below the riverbed to sustain riparian vegetation and river pools?
you know, that's out of my lane. To talk about sustaining of vegetation is not a hydrogeologic question. And I didn't discuss that anywhere in my testimony, either my direct testimony or my rebuttal testimony.
Okay, I just wanted to know if I realize that, but I just want to know if you happen to know that outside of that. So thank you for that answer. Okay, just a couple more questions. On page 26 of your testimony, at line 4, you mentioned that a diversion rate of 686 gallons per minute, correct?
That's right.
Okay. I looked at the addendum, which is Solvang 19, and elsewhere in the EIR and wherever else point is, I didn't see that number 686 until I saw your direct testimony. Is this the only place where that number actually shows, to your knowledge?
Well, 686, as shown earlier on line 3, which I will read, it says, for the long-term criteria, we simulated 2 wells pumping at a combined diversion rate of 1,107 acre-feet per year from within Site B, which is equal to 686 gallons per minute combined for the 2 wells. So 686 gallons per minute is simply a conversion of one of the 3 units to another unit. So if you were to find it anywhere, you would find reference to not 686 gallons a minute, but 1,107 acre-feet per year.
Which is, as you pointed out, in table 2.0-3 in the addendum, correct?
That's right. Yeah, it's really confusing how many different units there are between cubic feet per second, gallons per minute, and acre feet per year.
I think we would all agree with that. Yes, thank you. But also in that same table under note E, we're reminded that the estimated Site B 2 well capacity, which is what Solvang's requesting, is 920 GPM or 2.05 CFS, correct?
2.05 CFS is the maximum instantaneous well capacity. I don't have it in front of me, but that is not sustainable for the long term, right? That would yield more water than that 1107 restriction.
I have to admit, I'm a little confused because my understanding is that the amended petition is basically a request by Solvang to have a maximum 1368 AFA across the 3 wells. But as to the 2 wells at well site B, well, to finish that sentence, so 1368 across the 3 wells or 2.83 or 2.84 CFS, somewhere in that range. But when you're looking at well site B, my understanding is that is 1107 or 2.05 CFS. And then according to this note, it's the estimated capacity that translates to 920 GPM. So my point of confusion is that in your testimony, you're saying that, well, in your testimony, are you saying that your maximum diversion rate for those 2 wells would actually only be 686 compared to the 920 that I'm seeing in this footnote E in the table?
Good question. And seeing the table might help because I looked at my presentation and it cuts off the footnotes. But
okay, yeah, that would be Ms. Mullins Solvang 19.
Great, thank you.
I think that's correct, but then we'd have to go to the table.
Right.
And just for everyone's note, I know this is going long, but this is important. This is of interest to me too. So
okay.
So let's continue on this line.
I promise it won't be much longer, but thank you for the additional time.
Well, I also want to understand what the different limits are and as compared to what's in the petition itself.
I tried to make it a little clearer in what I'll talk about in November, because I put all the units. Every time I refer to one unit, I refer to all the others just for clarity.
Well, and I didn't mean to say that you were unclear. It's just that the petition has been evolving over time. So
right. Yeah, that's for sure. So are we waiting for that?
We're waiting for, I think, Solvang 19.
Great.
And let me just make sure I do have that as the correct, again, we're looking for the addendum. Okay, great. And then we want to go down to, oh boy, I don't know what the PDF number is. I'm sorry, but it's table.
I got it. It's PDF page 21, if I may.
Thank you very much.
You betcha.
Okay, that's exactly the table. Yeah, so if you just go down a little farther, we'll see note E. Okay, and my understanding is the 920 GPM equals 2.05 CFS. is what, as it states, would be the proposed well capacity for those two wells. And I believe it's correct that the amended petition, again, is asking for a maximum diversion rate of 2.84 CFS or 1368 AFA across the three wells. And simple math seems to me to suggest that 2.05 would be attributed to the wells, to two wells on well side B, and the remainder goes to three. Is that correct as far as you understand?
That's right. That 2.05 is the second column from the right, which is, if you, I don't know how you can scroll up and down, but if you can fit
Gotcha.
the headers,
Yeah,
might help. It's called the
exactly.
maximum monthly diversion rate.
Thank you. Right. And the remainder 0.78 would be for well three as stated. So that's clear.
Okay.
So I guess my question, Mr. Nicely, if you know, is if your testimony is that the maximum rate of diversion for the two wells at well site B will be 686 GPM, is there a reason that the city is asking for what appears to be 920 or 2.05 CFS? And I think I know the answer, but I just want to kind of make sure that that my thinking on this is correct. Can you help explain that discrepancy, I suppose?
Sure. This is the all these columns here say maximum, right?
Yeah.
All of the headers that are off screen have the word maximum at the very top, right?
Okay.
So all of them are the maximum monthly diversion rates. So pumping could happen at a short term at 2.05 CFS, which is the 920 gallons per minute. However, it's also subject to the third line from the left with again, the headers aren't showing the ends in 1107. It has to stay within both of those. And that
Okay.
1107 is where we get the 686, a lesser rate. And the mixed units are a huge part of the problem here.
But you could reach the 1107. The 1107 is a fixed number. That's the maximum that the city would be able to divert on an annual basis. But how they get there can change, correct? They could pump it 920 on some days and 686 on other days and 400 on other days, correct? As long as you don't exceed that maximum limit, you're not really limited except by the change petition, which would say we're not going to go above 2.05 CFS in any given day. In other words, there's different ways to get there based on your GPM. And
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
And so
The total volume will be the project maximum of 1368,
okay.
which 1107 is proposed to come from site B.
Okay. So is it your testimony that you could use a number other than 686 GPM? You could go higher or lower, and at the end of the year still be, at or below the 1107 AFA?
Sure. That would not violate their annual operations plan shown here.
Do you think it's reasonable when someone wants to determine, let's just say generally speaking, potential impacts, whether it's on drawdown or surface flow or species and so forth, that they would want to determine the worst case scenario and therefore would look to the maximum rates to make that determination?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Which was central to my analysis.
So you're saying that in your analysis you actually assumed a maximum rate of 920 GPM, or
We did for the short-term period,
okay,
for the short-term pumping rate, which was the second part of our TICE analysis that's discussed in my
okay.
Solvang 05.
Let me just
testimony.
finish this line of questioning with this last question. If Solvang were to be allowed to, if their change petition were approved as amended, okay, there would be no restriction on their ability to pump at a rate higher than 686 GPM. That could be, for example, 920 on any given day or series of days, as long as they stay within that maximum annual yield, correct?
They would also have to stay within the maximum monthly diversion amount, which limits them from pumping over, as is shown in here. And again, the headers aren't shown, which is slightly stymieing.
If we could just pull that down a little bit, we can
Yeah.
see the headers
Thank you.
better. There you go.
Great.
Thank you.
So the column third from the left called maximum monthly diversion amount. They might be able to pump at the 920 gallons a minute, which is the 2.05 column, but they would not be able to exceed it. It would have to be distributed monthly as shown here, because this is their pumping plan. So they could not pump 920 gallons a minute hard in 6 months, because that would violate the third column from the left.
But it wouldn't
94 acre feet
violate,
per year.
sorry to interrupt, but that wouldn't, this is an operational plan that the city has presented as part of its addendum.
Right.
My recollection is this is not, and I don't know for sure, but I'm just asking if you know, is this actually part of the amended change petition?
I would have to ask perhaps Ms. O'Sullivan that question.
This is unorthodox, but can we, I want to know the answer to this because I also was under the impression that this monthly operation plan is not part of the change petition and the request is to approve the change without restrictions as shown here. Is that an accurate understanding, Ms. O'Sullivan?
The permit conditions that the city submitted include the maximum 1368 acre feet and the maximum 2.84 CFS. This table is not included in our permit conditions. That I think that's what Mr. Puccini is referring to when he says our amended change petition. However, we are going to be distributing our pumping across our 3 wells.
So let me make a very specific question. If the State Water Board were to impose this operational plan as a term or condition in the permit, would the city of Solvang object to that restriction?
You know, Ms. Kinsey, I'm not prepared to answer that on behalf of
That's fair.
at this time.
That's fair. Well, think about that. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, Ms. O'Sullivan. Back to you, Mr. Puccini.
Thank you, Ms. Kenzie. That was also on my mind, by the way. I mean, again, insofar as Mr. Nicely's analysis is depending on a particular set of presumptions that's reflected in this table, it's difficult for the resource agencies to know whether to rely exactly on his conclusions because we don't know essentially whether or not.
Objection, Ms. Kinsey.
That's
not
fair.
the time for argument. This is for cross-examination of Mr. Nicely.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I agree with that. And I understand the point, Mr. Puccini. So please, let's proceed with your cross-exam.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. And then I think this actually will be the last question. Mr. Nicely, again, on page 26 of your direct testimony, lines 5 through 7, you state diversion from well number 3 is excluded from this analysis because due to operational constraints, well number 3 is not operated when flows at the Alisal Bridge are less than 1.5 CFS, and you refer to exhibit Solvang 93. And my understanding is that Solvang 93 is the protest dismissal agreement, or what sometimes is referred to as the settlement agreement. Is that correct?
Solvang 93 is the protest dismissal agreement, right?
Okay. So there was some questions about the applicability of that agreement, depending on whether or not the change petition is approved by the board. So is it fair to presume that you presumed in making this statement that that settlement agreement is in effect now and remain in effect regardless of the outcome of the change petition request?
It's my understanding that it's in effect now and would be in effect without regard to whether this is approved or denied.
Did you ever determine how your analysis would change if that agreement were not in effect? In other words, it sounds like you excluded well 3 from your analysis based on what that settlement agreement provides, but you didn't actually do an analysis if well 3 was not, in other words, if you included well 3, you never did an analysis presuming well 3 would be included. Is that correct?
The analysis was focused on site B because that seems to be the focus of the question that's being proposed to us. And therefore it did not seem like it was required to be included. Now, our earlier analysis for the earlier hearing order did consider the absolute worst case scenario of that this is the much maligned one-to-one removal presumption that we did for that analysis. It was included for that, but not included in this analysis with regard to moving the project down to site B.
So whether it's because of the settlement agreement or not, the answer is that it just was excluded. And okay. Very, very last question. You just mentioned the one-to-one. If you were diverting surface flow, okay, and you take water out, is that a 1-to-1 ratio?
Diverting water from the river, it would be 1-to-1.
Okay.
Big if, because we've already discussed some of the 1-to-1 removal and how that's not relevant. But I'm a hydrogeologist, means I pay attention to what happens below the ground and its impact on what happens above the ground. Principally.
But you are aware that the water board views surface water and subsurface water in the same respect, correct, in terms of diversions?
Objection. That's a legal conclusion.
I'll sustain the objection, and I think, Mr. Piccini, you said you were done, so I would encourage you to, I mean, unless you really have a good question, I think we should leave it here.
I think you're right. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, I think I will go in the usual order and look to Ms. Hall. Do you have questions on behalf of, and I can't, there we are. Do you have questions on behalf of Caltrout for Mr. Nicely?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And then I will look to either Ms. Beal or your colleague. Do you have questions for Mr. Nicely?
Yes, I would like to ask a few questions, if I may.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Mr. Nicely. My name is Lori Beal. I'm an attorney for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Nice to see you this morning.
Likewise.
I'd like to ask just a few clarifying questions about your testimony, if that's okay. First, you are here testifying on behalf of the city of Solvang, correct?
Correct.
Are you being compensated by the city for your testimony?
Objection. Relevance.
Well, I mean, Ms. Beal, if you're just trying to lay the foundation that Mr. Nicely is a paid consultant, I mean, let's do this very quickly.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward.
That's fine. Yeah.
I think he is, but I think it's an appropriate question for our record here.
Yes, I'm under contract to support the city, but my license as a geologist and certified hydrogeologist require all of my work to protect all of the people of California who would reasonably interact with my work.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any training or experience as a fisheries biologist?
I do not.
Okay. In your testimony, you do refer to the 2000 biological opinion for the Kachuma project a few times. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. When you developed your testimony, were you aware that NIMS and the Bureau of Reclamation had reinitiated that consultation, in part because there was new information suggesting the analysis needs to be revised?
I answered that question.
Pardon?
Okay. Yeah, we were focused on the biological opinion that is in effect now, and understood that the draft might be what you're referring to has not been approved and therefore was not part of our analysis. However, we did look at it, and but we did not incorporate any of it because it's still draft.
My question is that, were you aware that the 2000 opinion was determined by NIMS had some flawed assumptions and that it needed to be revised? Were you aware of that?
No, I was only aware that it is the governing biological opinion, and specifically, I was only focused on the releases and the operation elements of that, not the fish, just parts of that.
Okay. Would you agree that relying on an analysis that has been determined to need revision could lead to mistaken conclusions?
Relying on that, yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay. I wanted to ask just a few questions and make sure I'm understanding the different analyses that you've done here. So is it correct that your analysis in Solvang 21, so that's the addendum, that did use the 1-to-1 ratio to analyze effects of the proposed project?
So all Solvang 21 is my own GSI memorandum, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's addressed several times in my direct testimony about why we did that for the prior hearing order. And it's also referred to twice as an oversimplification to be consistent with the CEQA analysis for that project in both paragraph 72 and 53.
Mm-hmm. Yes, could we please, Ms. Mullen, take a look at exhibit Solvang 21 at page 9 of the PDF at the bottom of the page?
So Solvang 21, page 9, please.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. If you go down to the very bottom of that page, Mr. Nicely, I'd like to direct your attention to that last paragraph starting with however. Would you mind reading that for us?
However, GSI takes a conservative approach with the analysis by assuming Solvang's diversions would only remove water from surface flow. Want me to continue?
Oh, yes, please.
Sure. There's not currently a defensible scientific basis on which to establish the percentage of surface flow that is removed during underflow pumping. This would require a complex site-specific study, which is beyond the scope of this report.
Okay, thank you. So it would be possible to undertake a site-specific investigation to more accurately understand the impacts of Solvang's pumping. Is that correct?
Defensible is the key word there. We could do a scientific analysis, but considering the scope of this project and the narrow question it was answering, that this sentence is reasonable and matches what we were trying to do with this study.
I understand, but what I'm asking is I believe this implies that you could do a more accurate site-specific study, that is a possibility.
The site-specific study would probably have to include the same scope as the Sentinez River hydrologic model, which started in 1979, 44 years ago, and has been updated with the Riverware model. However, this would be a good time to mention that the Riverware model, which might be the appropriate use tool to do this, is a complex modeling system. When my colleague took the 1 week-long training for this, he learned that the Solvang implementation of the Riverwell model was only one of 2 of the most complicated, the other of which was the Colorado River project. So it is, when I say it's complicated, it's a bit of an understatement, that the understanding of the operation of the river in a model is extremely complicated and has been undergoing revisions over and over since the early 90s when Stetson has been operating this current model.
I understand that, but would it be possible, for example, to measure the relationship between pumping and surface flows immediately upstream and downstream of the city's existing wells, and in that manner develop a more accurate understanding of the effects of the city's pumping on surface flows?
Anything is possible, right?
I'm asking for your professional opinion as a hydrogeologist.
Right. The studies are only as good as the data that they have, and we limit ourselves to the data they have. We don't. So to answer to the question is, we would need a lot of data. We would need stream flows, We would need quite a few elements that are far outside of the budget, frankly, of a small city to do such analysis. And therefore, relying on these vetted models seems sufficient to answer these questions.
Okay. When looking at potential effects to a federally protected species, would you agree that using conservative assumptions is appropriate?
I can't speak to the federal species protection. That's outside of my area of expertise. However, using conservative assumptions is applicable when it's applicable. And as I said here, the one-to-one removal is overly simplistic and is at what we call an absolute worst case scenario.
And in what other scenarios did you evaluate in addition to the absolute worst case scenario?
For this report, we considered, I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but we considered removal of pumping from the flow above and below the project as required by that hearing order, that this, not the current hearing order, the prior hearing order that was asked to answer the narrow question of the city's impacts on flows above, at, and downstream of the project site.
Did your analysis evaluate the effects of the pumping on flows at any point in between the Alisal Bridge and Lompoc?
No, because the long-term data that we needed for this was not available.
Okay, thank you. Just a few more questions. So you're going back to your testimony. I don't know if you want to look at it. It's on page 22 of the PDF, or if you're comfortable just, going from your memory. But I just wanted to make sure I understand the refined analysis of the Riverwells project, which is a title heading in your testimony, correct?
Are we talking about the paragraph 54 or so? Or somewhere else?
Let's see.
Why don't we go ahead and pull it up? It's Solvang 5, correct?
Solvang 5, yeah. So I'm looking at page 21. Oh no, PDF page 22.
Yeah, the header's on the bottom of page 21 that does say this, the refined analysis of the Riverwells project.
Okay. Was this refined analysis prepared subsequent to the addendum analysis you did in Solvang 21?
Yeah, the addendum analysis in Solvang 21 was for the prior hearing order. The refined analysis was done for the current hearing order.
I see. Was there a reason that the refined analysis was not done previously in the addendum?
Yeah, we thought it was superfluous and excessive to answer the narrow question that was being asked.
Okay. So in undertaking the refined analysis, am I correct in understanding that it's based on the Hopkins 2012 report that was prepared for Alisal?
It is not based on that report. That report is provided for reference to the reasonableness of our analysis, which is discussed further on. I think it's on paragraph 65 and following, which is several pages after this page.
Do you know whether Hopkins did any surveys to observe habitat conditions in the areas affected by Alisal's pumping?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. In undertaking your refined analysis, did you do any surveys or observations of habitat conditions in the area between the Alisal Bridge and Lompoc?
No, again, that's outside of my out of my lane. That's outside of my area of expertise, and therefore I wouldn't dare.
That sounds reasonable. In paragraph 13 of your testimony, I'm sorry, I lost the page number. I'll just ask you. I believe
PDF page 4, if I may.
I believe you state that the Solvang project will not adversely impact surface flows at Alisal. Is that correct?
Correct.
By that, do you mean the project will have no effect on in-stream flows at Alisal?
That is correct, and that matches the certified FEIR findings as it shows here on paragraph 12 of page 4.
Well, you do say, paragraph 13, that the project will have a slight but insignificant reduction in surface flow at Lompoc Narrows. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a separate question, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah.
But you're saying the effect at Alisal, just to be clear, and I apologize, is 0.
Except the effect at Alisal is 0. The effect at the Lompoc Narrows, 20 plus miles downstream, is insignificant, as I
And when you
said
say
on.
insignificant, is it your testimony that that amount of difference is insignificant for steelhead?
Again, can't talk about steelhead other than the fact that it is insignificant because it was insignificant. It was determined to be insignificant in the certified final EIR, and therefore, and we have shown that the effects would be even less. So if they were already insignificant and the reductions are even less, then they're still insignificant. So that insignificance is transferred over from the certified FEIR and repeated here for that reason. I know I can't address anything having to do with habitat.
Okay. On page 19 of your testimony, if we could take a quick look at paragraph 49. I believe you state, you noted that Site B is downstream of Alisal Bridge and target flow sites for Kachuma project to protect steelhead spawning habitat. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you know whether protection of steelhead spawning habitat is also protective of juvenile steelhead that have left the area of the nest?
No, this here is a reference to another document, and it's not my own words. It could have been in quotes, but I am not. I am that protection of steelhead habitat is referring to the target flow sites. I think that phrase has changed, but those target flow sites are there for that reason, as was stated in one of those opinions. I'm not going to reference any of the life cycles of the steelhead.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you are aware that the entire main stem of the Santa Ynez River is designated as critical habitat for steelhead?
Not sure that's relevant to my analysis.
So you are aware of that?
I-
Your analysis seems to make statements that the pumping project will not affect steelhead based on your statement in 49 that Site B is downstream of Alisal.
Yeah, my reference there is about the flow sites referenced in the 2000 biological opinion and the requirements of State Water Resources Control Board Order 2019-0148 to maintain flows at those points. However, yes, I am aware of the status of the steelhead species in this river.
Okay. I just have a few more questions, so I really appreciate your bearing with me here.
Great.
So the Hopkins report that you reference in your refined analysis demonstrates that water levels in river pools can be affected by nearby pumping wells, most notably within 400 to 500 feet of the well. Is that correct?
That's right, and that was included in my presentation on Monday. An image of that, yes.
Is it possible that Solvang's proposed wells could reduce water levels in isolated pools during periods of low flow?
My analysis was based on when there is no flow, right? The longest kind of, which we can kind of consider the worst case scenario, when there's no recharge in the river. And we determined that under those conditions, they will not decrease flow. However, it's our opinion that because let me make sure I get the wording right here. Because the underflow is below the river elevation in this area, that pumping will not affect will not affect the surface flow since it's almost always a losing stream. There are some very limited times when the river is a gaining stream. That is to say that the groundwater level is higher than the riverbed elevation, but that is the exception and not the rule. And that's been documented in many documents outside of my work in the river for decades.
When you, following up on your comment that you were assuming the river is dry, when you say you're assuming the river is dry, are you assuming there's literally no water in the river between Alisal and Lompoc?
Whether there is or isn't water, it's not providing any recharge to our model.
But you're
So-
not opining on whether existing habitat conditions in those circumstances could be affected by Solvang's project, are you?
No, mine is a little more narrow than that. I mean, it's along the same lines, but it's a smidge more narrow. For it to be dry, there's no water, and that was part of our analysis. There's no water, right? So no, I presume no water means no habitat, but I was just considering it hydrogeologically as there being no recharge.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. So I think you already covered this, but just to clarify, you are not, are you testifying that the city's proposed project will have no adverse effects on Steelhead?
I'm testifying that the effects will be insignificant, and I'm reiterating that decision that was included in the certified FEIR. It was determined it was insignificant there, and it is even less significant now in this current project description. So yes.
And when you say insignificant, I'm speaking particularly about steelhead and critical habitat. So is it your testimony that the proposed pumping will have insignificant effects on steelhead and critical habitat?
In as much as mine is a refinement of the certified FEIR, yes.
Okay. Just a couple more. Do you know whether the Hopkins report recommended any mitigation measures to protect steelhead?
He did.
Do you know what those were?
They were periodic. Well, whether they pertain here or not is a question perhaps, but they involved the cessation of pumping at times, which was deemed to be reasonable. There was a managed pumping program for that project, which was immediately adjacent to the river, and the pumping radius of which would immediately remove water from flow in certain conditions, which aren't available here. He did suggest several mitigation measures because of but it was a different area, and therefore they're not perfectly analogous to this area.
Do you know if Hopkins recommended a monitoring program?
He did.
Did you consider making similar recommendations to Solvang in order to verify the assumptions in your refined analysis?
I did not, because it did not seem warranted based on the results of our analysis.
I see. Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. I think at this point, I think I have a few questions, but I wanted to turn to you first, Mr. Nicely. Do you need a break? Would you like a 10-minute break, or would you like to just power through with my questions?
If you wouldn't mind just continuing, that'd be fine with me.
I'm fine with it. I wanted to ask, you're the one on the answering all the questions here. So
Very, very kind. Thank you.
All right. Let me see if I can formulate some of these. One of the questions I have is, if we had talked, I had asked you earlier about this question of when surface water and maybe let's call it underflow, and underflow is disconnected, such that pumping of the underflow would not increase any percolation from surface flows. Am I sort of accurately stating the science so far?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we have that. How would, if I were someone, I mean, let's say, for example, Solvang puts its pumps in and is pumping away, and this is just a hypothetical. Is there a way to know, how would one know if there's flow in the river, some amount of flow, if there's flow in the river and pumping is occurring, how might one know whether or not the elevations are such that there is either connection or disconnection between the surface flow and the underflow.
Very, very, very good. So that's a great question. I'd like to establish one thing and then answer it if that's okay,
Right, yes.
without being obstreperous, right?
Yes.
So it's established that the water table elevation is usually below the stream bed elevation, and that leads to seepage from the flowing of the surface flow downward into the aquifer, right? And that's the usual case. But when that's not the case, the water from the aquifer would flow to the surface reaches. That was from the Stetson documentation of their model, that those last two sentences. So I think that using the groundwater elevation as a proxy for that relationship would be a perfectly reasonable method of knowing that, of knowing whether it's even occurring, right? So if we know that the underflow levels are below the riverbed elevation, then it's not possible for the water to be, for that condition to be taking place, right? So that's just the question of whether it's going on or not.
Mhm.
I don't know if a separate question or whether you even asked whether we can know the degree or whether you just know whether it's happening. I'm sorry, I don't remember what you asked.
I think well, if that may be a follow-up, but now I'm curious, what do you mean by degree? Because I understand it as a yes or no, either it's connected or, I mean, I can understand they
Right.
can be close. So what do you mean by that?
Well, it seems like if it's disconnected, then there's no 0 degree, right?
Right.
But if it is connected, then it could be happening to some degree. So,
Right.
and that since it's so ephemeral, that seems to happen very infrequently based on the hydrograph that was provided. And my understanding of the way it works and the Stetson Riverware documentation memo and our work in the basin, the eastern management area, working with the parent district, that it almost never happens. So I think that the easiest way is to measure monitoring subsurface levels in surrounding wells in the area to know if it's happening or not. And to a large degree, USBR already does this, right? They measure those wells monthly. And so it's already part of the management, right? To work on, to discuss, to figure out what's called the dewatered storage and the above narrows and below narrows accounts. That's already part of that, collecting that data.
So, and I just wanted to pause for a second. You said in your testimony, and I should have stopped you sooner. I think you said it is almost always not the case, or it is the case. Can you just clarify what you meant and what is the case? That it's either connected or disconnected. What did you mean there?
The water table elevation, that's what they called it. The subsurface level is usually below the stream bed elevation.
And that just tells us that I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Below the stream bed elevation, we're not talking about a situation where it's just a losing stream. We're talking about a situation where there's 100 or 0% of connection. Is that?
Yeah, if it's it can be a losing stream and disconnected. So I'll read the whole sentence one more time because I only read the first half, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the water table elevation is usually below the stream bed elevation, leading to seepage flowing from the surface into the aquifer. So it's an elevation thing, and it might be best to show an image from my presentation, but if that sentence helps, great.
Sure, let's see, let's the image, if that might help, that would be great.
No, we'll give it our best shot. So my slide on solving 167.
Great.
If we may. Slide 15. Thank you. Great. It's complicated. Okay. This shows perfectly fine analysis, image of several things. Basically, it shows the pumping water level as the blue lines in several wells, and what this calls water table depression from groundwater pumping. So if the water level in the well is like where it says HA1 below the river, I forget what those refer to, doesn't matter. But if the pumping water level is below the river, then it's a losing stream, and the pumping cannot, it's not connected, and the pumping cannot pull flow from the river. That's the normal case. This was from an area where the wells are right next to the river, not the case here.
Thank you. So in theory, as I understand it, in theory, you could using the available information, you could establish some water table elevation at which one would be fairly comfortable that shows disconnection between the surface flow and the underflow. And at that water table elevation, increases in pumping are not going to have a direct effect on surface flow. Is that
correct? And
right?
these are summarized annually in what's currently the 45th Stetson annual report, and USBR data are used in those, and they're used directly in the calculation of dewatered storage and the above narrows and below narrows accounts. They're all the data is already being collected, and that could help with this.
But in theory, so this is where and I'm not sure if this makes sense or not, but I'm brainstorming as I'm sitting here, right? Is in theory, you could have, you could set a permit term, for example, that says at this water table elevation, we're essentially not concerned about impacts of surface flow. I mean, I'm in thinking of terms and conditions that there may be other, you might be looking at the water table elevation and storage and these kinds of things, but at this elevation, we're not concerned about the impacts of pumping. I mean, the term wouldn't say this, but we're not concerned about the impacts of pumping on surface flows because there is no direct relationship.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Something, yeah. It was not I guess it didn't come out quite as a question, but I was looking for any comments you might have. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I understand that.
Yeah, and it's complicated. It's been being studied forever, and as I said, it's as complicated as the Colorado River system, but only in miniature.
Right. That's
So,
why
right.
that's why it's good. Maybe I'll look to my team at this point. Mr. Wooldridge or Mr. Anderson, do you have questions for Mr. Nicely at this time?
I don't have any questions.
I did have one question.
Great. Please go ahead.
Mr. Nicely, a few moments ago, you were talking about gaining and losing streams. And I just wanted to make sure, maybe I'm understanding if it's not a descriptive term, but you said that it could only be a gaining stream when the groundwater levels are above the river bottom or something to that effect.
That's correct. Yeah.
So does that not include any analysis of inflow from upstream tributaries?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. Does our analysis can I restate it just to make sure I understand it, maybe? So are you asking whether tributary inflow can, I'm sorry, what's the relationship in the question you're asking?
In the situation where there's a storm event or something like that, and the groundwater table is below the river bottom, yet the stream is still gaining because of tributary inflow.
Oh.
I'm just wondering, is that something different than a gaining stream, or is that?
Okay, yeah, so yeah, the words modeled, one-to-one, and gaining have been used with several different meanings in this discussion today. So what you're referring to seems to be that the tributary inflow is contributing to surface flow. Yeah, that's a surface water condition, and that would just be the contribution at a confluence of a tributary flowing into the stream. Yeah. Am I mischaracterizing that?
No, that's right. I was
Okay.
just curious if you were if the term losing stream in this sense was
Right.
specific just to groundwater tables, or if it was more of a descriptive term of what's happening in the stream.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot of inflows and outflows from the stream, both above Lake Cachuma and Santa Cruz Creek and all the others, and in and out of the river, right? Specifically at inflows, there are lots and lots of tributaries that contribute to the stream. It's also Puertas Creek being a major one, right? And but those are not what I'm referring to as gaining or losing. What I'm referring to is whether the river is contributing to groundwater. We'll call it groundwater groundwater by percolating out of the bottom of the river and going down to the subsurface water. That's called a losing stream. So it's losing flow as it goes. But it didn't have to do with surface flow coming in from the tributaries.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my only question.
Thank you. And I didn't have any more, so I think I will turn this back to Ms. O'Sullivan. Do you have redirect for Mr. Nicely?
I do, very briefly. I will try to do it briefly so we can go to our morning break probably. Okay, Mr. Nicely, thank you very much for all of your time and sticking with us. I just have a few questions for you. On Monday, Mr. Bivens asked you about the difference between the 1,053 acre-feet baseline used in the city's FEIR and the city's current project, which is a total of 1,368 acre-feet diversion. Do you remember that? Oh, sorry, Tim, or Mr. Nicely, I didn't hear that.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I recall.
Thank you. And as part of your response, you referred to the comparison point from our FEIR analysis that you used in your analysis that supported the addendum. Do you remember making that comparison between the FEIR and what you used in the addendum?
I do.
Okay. Can you clarify what acre-feet diversion from the FEIR, which pulls from Stetson Tech Memo 6 analysis, that you compared the city's current project to?
Sure. The FEIR considered a pumping volume of 2,400 acre-feet a year, and I think I recall I said 4,500, and then I corrected it later, but it was comparing it to the 2,400 acre-feet a year as the for that.
Thank you, Mr. Nicely, for clarifying that. And Mr. Bivens also asked you on Monday about whether you had conducted your own modeling analysis to verify the conclusions in Stetson Tech Memo 6. Do you remember that?
I do.
And part of your reply, you said that you had conducted your own analysis and that the discussion of that model was in your testimony. You remember that?
That's true. Yes, I do.
And you were referring to your TICE analysis. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you were not talking about rerunning the San Ynez River hydrology model that is also part of Stetson Tech Memo 6.
That's correct. As I've said, our TICE analysis was one of the two parts of Tech Memo 6, the other part of which was the Santa Ynez River hydrologic model. But since our project was, I've said it before, it was a diminution of that, we didn't think it was reasonable to have to rerun that.
Great. And in your opinion, going back to the TICE analysis, the information that you provided in your testimony, stating out all the parameters of your TICE analysis, in your opinion, is that sufficient for a qualified expert to reproduce your results?
Yeah, it is. We are similarly qualified to Stetson engineers, and we could reproduce their results in our calibration run that we described without having anything outside of their Tech Memo number 6.
Great. And so Stetson's Tech Memo 6 included a similar level of information to what you included in your testimony.
Yeah,
right?
That's correct. Yes.
And that was sufficient for you to redo that analysis.
Right.
Great. And then finally, Mr. Bivens also asked you about whether there was any document that modeled the impact. Oh, let's see, maybe you already answered this. Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So Mr. Bivens also asked you about whether there was any document that modeled the impacts of the project on Kachuma members. Do you remember that?
Yes, and we had a short discussion on that.
Yeah, and you sort of started touching on it in your previous answer to one of my questions here today, but you responded to him that Stetson Tech Memo 6 had two parts, and that one of those parts was the San Ynez River hydrology model. And based on your understanding of what Tech Memo 6 modeled with the San Ynez River hydrology model, that model included impacts to the Kachuma member units, correct?
That's right. That was the part of the model that we didn't discuss at as much length as the other path.
And that level of modeling was looking at 2,400 acre feet diversion.
Correct. Yeah, and that the results of that we've talked a little bit about.
And would it be your position that the modeling done with the San Ynez River hydrological model, which includes, as we've established, evaluating impacts to Kachuma member units, that would be a conservative analysis of the city's current project?
I would. It's a very complete and conservative analysis, both.
So any effect shown in Tech Memo 6 with respect to the Kachuma member units for the modeling of 2,400 acre feet would be less for the city's current project.
Right. The EIR correctly summarized that the impacts to the CCRB and the member units is not significant with impacts compared to the baseline. And that was for a larger project. And while they're table 4 and table 17 show slightly increased water rights releases, they show reduced fish releases, less evaporation, if I recall, less spills and leakage, and all of those are well documented in that report that show that was less than significant compared to the baseline, and now the project is even smaller, so it's less than significant, or still less than significant, I guess is a better way to say it.
Thank you, Mr. Nicely. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will turn to you first, Mr. Bivens. Do you have any recross based on that redirect?
I do. Thank you, Ms. Kenzie, and Mr. Nicely. Thanks again for sticking with us here. So just so the record is clear, Stetson's Tech Memo number 6, that was authored in 2011, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And when you characterize the impacts of the River Wells project as described in that Tech Memo as less than significant, what measure of significance are you using?
So our project showed that the impacts would be smaller. We won't use significant or insignificant, right? Smaller than those documented in Stetson's Tech Memo number 6. And the certified FEIR process imputed the decision that those were less than significant there. So again, as I just said, since they were less than significant then and they're smaller now, they continue to be less than significant.
And I appreciate that, but how are you as a hydrogeologist determining the significance of those impacts?
I see. Well, we looked at the actual metrics of the triggers that would cause significance and insignificance, specifically in water level drawdown at a distance as the trigger which caused effects which were then determined to be less than significant. And we determined that those triggers of drawdown were diminished and therefore less than significant. Does that answer your question, or am I missing something?
Well, it might. It's a little hard to understand. So in terms of the comparison that you or Stetson are making to evaluate the significance of the impacts on the Kachuma project, are you comparing those to overall releases? What is the level of comparison? Strike that. Let me ask it that way. What is the comparison that you're making to determine significance, first of all?
Well, the certified FEIR determines the level of significance, right? Both locally in the river and to the Kachuma project members, right? and all of the mechanisms, all of the assumptions, if you will, still pertain, with the only changes being the city's volume of pumping and some additional releases that are in part of table 2 in term 28 flows during wet years, sorry. So
there are,
and those were summarized in their table 4 that, as again, showed slightly more water releases and less evaporation, less spills. So all of those went into the discussion and the decision that it was less than significant.
okay, let me try this a different way. So the 2011 Stetson Tech Memo number 6 quantified the impact of the project that it was analyzing on water rights releases and determined that it would result in an additional 184 acre feet per year of water rights releases, correct?
Correct, among other elements, yeah.
And so how then do you determine that 184 acre feet per year of additional water rights releases are not significant?
I'm frankly transferring the decision of insignificance to this diminished project.
Okay, so you're not, well, okay. First of all, you're not conducting an independent analysis of significance.
I didn't think it was warranted since it was already insignificant, correct?
Okay, and then going back to let's just stick with the original project as analyzed in the Stetson Tech Memo with the 184 additional acre feet per year of water rights releases. How are you determining that those additional releases are less than significant?
I feel like we're answering the same question several times. I'm so sorry.
I guess I'm not understanding, so let's try again.
Right. So, okay. Their table, they have a table. It's called table 17 on their report. It's the second part of this that considers these questions. Tech Memo 6, table 17. It indeed does show increased water rights releases, right? But it has also a decrease in fish water releases, among other elements, right? Less evaporation, fewer spills, less leakage. And based on those, I believe that the change of water deliveries to member units was a mere 8 acre feet in that report. And 8 acre feet with a then pumping rate of 2,400 acre feet a year is essentially 0. And 8 acre feet, as shown on that table, is insignificant. So that's the basis of that. It's the basis of a comparison to the certified FEIR and the small version, the small values that were included in that. Essentially 0 decreases in water rights deliveries to member units in their Tech Memo 6, that are still valid.
Okay, and so then with the conditions under which the revised project would be operating involve greater fish releases than those were analyzed in Stetson Tech Memorandum number 6, correct?
Well, there would be, everything would be diminished, right? They had fewer fish releases, but more water rights releases, right? So I'm not sure whether we're talking about releases or deliveries here.
Well, let me make sure I get an answer to my question first of all, which is
great.
The fish releases that were analyzed in Stetson Tech Memo number 6, you would expect those to increase based on the implementation of Order WR 2019-148, correct?
Well, they increase without regard to the city's project. It's independent of the city's project. It is imputed in every future scenario, whether the city is there or not, it seems. That those table releases are, those table 2 releases are part of the future operation of the river. Am I wrong?
No, but when you described how the effects of the water rights releases in Tech Memo number 6 were not significant, I understood you to be saying their significance was diminished in part by lower fish releases, correct?
the lower fish releases offset the additional water rights releases, right?
Yes, and so then under order 2019-0148, you would expect those fish releases to increase by some amount, correct?
2019-0148 would only changed one thing related to 8918, which was and that was the addition of the term 18 flows.
So you didn't consider the relationship between whatever the water rights releases would be under Solvang's current iteration of its project to fish releases and quantify the impacts on the Kachuma project supplies, correct?
No, because the city's project doesn't directly affect those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nicely. Let's talk a little bit about the model, the modeling that you replicated. You indicated to me on Monday that you replicated a model that was originally prepared by Stetson, correct?
Starts the discussion of which starts on paragraph 65 of my direct testimony. Yeah.
Yeah, and how long did it take you and your team to replicate that model?
I took less than a week.
Relevant objection, relevance.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think I understand where Mr. Bivens is going. I think it's a fair question. So go ahead, Mr. Nicely.
Yeah, me and my modeling team could replicate that relatively quickly. It was definitely not in a prolonged period. It was relatively straightforward to do. The results happened pretty quickly. It wasn't a more onerous model. It happened. It all made sense. It was all pretty vanilla. It was all pretty plain, bread and butter, pick your analogy, modeling.
And then once you and your team had replicated that model, how long did it take you to calibrate it?
The replication was the calibration. If we could replicate their results with the model using their inputs, that was one part and parcel with the calibration.
I see. And were you able to have any discussions with anyone at Stetson as you replicated that model?
We have had discussions along the way with Stetson on our model, and it's also been reviewed by 2 or 3 of my colleagues to make sure that it all makes sense. 2 of whom are both certified hydrogeologists, and it all seemed perfectly reasonable.
And how long did that review take?
Oh, I don't recall. It was a week. Everything was done within a matter of a couple weeks. The whole thing.
Okay. And that's just so we're clear, because I'm a little bit confused by the different models. That's the TICE model, correct?
The TICE model, which is, yeah.
And that model doesn't purport to simulate the effects of the Riverworld projects on Kachuma project operations, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, not directly, if I may, but not directly. It affects the Riverwells project is much more complicated, but we had it in the back of mind as we did this, but did not update that large model.
Okay.
There simply wasn't time between the issuance of the order and now to do that, even if we wanted to.
No, I appreciate that. All right, I think that's all I have, Ms. Kenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens.
Thank you.
With that, I'll turn to Mr. Puccini. Do you have any additional questions for Mr. Nicely before we move on?
We can move on. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will turn to Ms. Hall. I realize you didn't have questions before, but do you have any questions now?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And then to you, Ms. Beal, do you have any additional questions for Mr. Nicely?
No, I don't. Nothing further.
Thank you. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Nicely, for joining us both Monday and today. And I think we will be seeing you again, but I really appreciate you being here and you're taking the time to answer my questions in particular, and appreciate your testimony today. Thank you. I think you may be
honored. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Great.
Bye-bye.
With that, let's go ahead and take a we will take a break, but let me just lay out where I think we're going next. After this, we'll pick up again with Mr. Gibson, which should be the city's last witness of the day. So that is my intent. But let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We will return at 11:02, it looks like.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to say something to bring everyone back online here. We're going to get started shortly. All right, I see I have Mr. Gibson and I have Ms. O'Sullivan. Ms. O'Sullivan, will you be introducing Mr. Gibson?
Yes, I will.
Wonderful. I will go ahead and administer the oath. First of all, good morning, Mr. Gibson. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Ms. Kinsey.
If you would please raise your right hand. Mr. Gibson, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Ms. O'Sullivan.
Thank you. And well, still good morning, Mr. Gibson. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Gibson, who will be testifying as a CEQA expert on behalf of the city. And Mr. Gibson, you submitted your written testimony as Exhibit Solvang 4. Is that right?
That is correct, I believe.
And Mr. Gibson, I believe your presentation is available, which you're going to refer to today during your presentation as Solvang 166. But just a note for Ms. Mullen, we did submit a revised version that just fixed a typo on some errors on one slide. So if we could use the revised version for Mr. Gibson's purposes.
Great. Revised Solvang 166.
And just another heads up, similar to our other witnesses, Mr. Gibson may not be referring to every slide, but he'll give direction as to which slides he's actually would like up on the screen.
Great, thank you.
All right, Mr. Gibson, with that, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Mullen, if you could bring up Solvang Exhibit 66, and while you're doing that, I am going to start. This will be a little lengthy. And we're just going to have to bear with it. So good day. My name is Joseph Gibson. I am testifying here on behalf of the city of Solvang as an expert on the California Environmental Quality Act with regard to the certified final EIR and the addendum prepared for the Water Basin Master Plan, or for the Water Master Plan and the River Wells Project. So if we could bring up slide 2, please, of Exhibit 166.
Well, let's pause there, Mr. Gibson, because I think we might be having trouble pulling that up. I apologize for this.
Not a problem.
I just want to make sure we get it on screen. I don't see it yet, so.
I don't see it yet either.
You're trying to open it. It may be a large document. Maybe I'll ask if one of my other team members is able to open the presentation. That may work. Sometimes our state-issued computers don't cooperate.
I'm trying to do that right now.
Thank you.
Well, at least it's not the last 2 minutes of the Super Bowl in a tied game.
There we go.
All right, so if we
We're
just
right.
go
It
to
looks like Mr. Anderson is now on the slides here. So just so you know, please go ahead, Mr. Gibson.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson, if you just go ahead and proceed to slide 2. I'm a partner with Meridian Consultants and have over 45 years experience completing environmental studies for water resource projects. My resume and bio have been submitted and are available as Exhibit Solvang 6. I was the primary author and principal lead for the preparation of the certified final EIR and the addendum. As noted, I am testifying here today as an expert in CEQA. Although I have extensive experience in geosciences, including hydrology and hydrogeology, I am not testifying an expert in those areas. In addition, I am not a biologist, and I am not testifying as a biologist in any manner. Can we go to slide 3, please? In preparation for today, I've reviewed the various materials related to the hearing issues. My testimony is directly related to hearing items 1C, 1D, 2, and 3. Slide 4, please. In reviewing the history of the project and my involvement, I want to offer a brief recap. The city first evaluated the River Wells project as part of the 2011 master plan update addressed by the certified EIR. The certified final EIR considered the following to address water supply issues for the city. 1, install and utilize existing and new wells along the Santa Ynez River. 2, utilize state water project water. 3, utilize central and upland wells located in or near the city. And 4, purchase water from ID1 or others. At that time, the first priority for the city was to develop and secure its water rights from the Santa Ynez River underflow. The city proposed to install up to 6 wells located along the Santa Ynez River and extract up to a maximum diversion rate of 5 CFS and up to a total diversion of 1,980 acre-feet per year. Finally, the city requested that the State Water Board amend its point of diversion to minimize potential adverse impacts on other diverters in the river and fishery resources. Can we advance to slide 5, please? In the original project considered in the final EIR, the proposed well sites were located along the north side of the Santa Ynez River, located approximately 1.5 miles west of the Alisal Bridge. The original project considered up to 6 new wells with a capacity of about 300 gallons per minute each. Continued operation of existing wells 3 and 7A, and the potential renovation of well 5 to create a total pumping capacity of 5 CFS. The proposed well sites located downstream of Alisal Bridge are designated in well sites A and well sites B as shown on the next slide. Please advance to slide 6, please. We've seen the slide by a number of presenters so far. Can we proceed to slide 8? The certified final EIR determined, actually, I think we want to go to slide 9. I'm sorry, slide 8, you're correct, that was it. The certified final EIR determined that all impacts would either be less than significant with mitigation, class 2, or less than significant by themselves, class 3. There were no significant unavoidable adverse impacts identified. Can we go to slide 9, please? In 2021, the city substantially scaled down the original project to what was considered in the addendum. This includes maintaining well site B within the area analyzed under the certified final EIR. Limit the city's diversion to its historical maximum annual diversion of 1,368 acre-feet per year. Limit its production rate to the historical maximum of 2.84 CFS. Install no more than 2 river wells at well site B. Locate any new wells 3,500 or more feet downstream of the Alisal Bridge. Locate new wells at least 150 feet away from the high water mark of the Santa Ynez River. And finally, reduce the city's reach of diversion from its current 19,500 feet to approximately 8,000 feet and shift it downstream to encompass the city's existing well 3 and site B. In preparing the addendum, we considered numerous documents. These include the 2000 biological opinion for the Kachuma project, the Kachuma project settlement agreement, the State Water Resources Board Water Right 89-18, Water Order 2019-0148, including the term 18 plan, and the annual monitoring plans for the operation of the Kachuma Reservoir. In addition, we also considered the 2019 BIOP for Steelhead and the 2016 draft BIOP, even though the latter was not finalized or published. Slide 10, please. The addendum supported the same conclusions and findings as for the certified final EIR for the topics considered. Slide 11, please. The addendum also updated the thresholds to match those published in the 2021 CEQA Guidelines Appendix G in effect at the time. The addendum updates the information and accounts for changes in circumstances and new information relevant to the Riverwell project. Ultimately, the analysis in the addendum found that the current circumstances at the time and new information available did not change the conclusions of the certified final EIR. No information was identified in the preparation of the addendum that would be considered, quote, of substantial importance, unquote, as defined by the CEQA guidelines section 15162 that would trigger the need for a supplemental or subsequent EIR. The same mitigation measures proposed in the implementation for the certified EIR for the original project would be implemented for the Riverwells project as revised, with minor revisions to accommodate the revised scope. Can we go to slide, I believe it's slide 7. Correct, thank you. This slide shows the differences between the project considered in the certified final EIR in the addendum and the key technical memorandum used at the time, Stetson Memo number 6, that examined well site B in the final EIR. Please go back to slide 7, please. Or we're there, yeah, I'm sorry. The hydrology analysis, including surface water and groundwater for the construction and operations of the wells, was completed for the certified final EIR through a number of technical memos completed by Stetson. These are numbers 1 through 5. Stetson memo number 6 specifically focused on the development of well site B and a reduced number of wells. It also considered a combined diversion at well site B of 2,400 acre-feet per year. As presented by Mr. Nicely in his testimony, there were other considerations included in the memo as part of the modeling. The analysis by Stetson 6 is considered conservative for both the original project and the Riverwells project in that, first, the model diversion of 2,400 acre-feet is greater than the diversion proposed under the original project of 1,980 acre-feet. The reduced size of the Riverwell project considered proposes lower that diversion yet further to 1,360 acre-feet. And finally, the analysis focused on periods with little or no flow in the river, which present conditions for the greatest impacts. The certified final EIR hydrological analysis demonstrates that even assuming a diversion rate of 2,400 acre-feet per year in very dry conditions, the subsurface water levels and surface water flows would remain similar to the levels and flows present under baseline conditions. As demonstrated in the addendum, this conclusion holds true for the current Riverwells project. As noted by Mr. Nicely in his testimony, GSI found that the current Riverwells project would have less effect on river conditions than the original project due to the smaller scale of the Riverwells project in that it's fewer wells, smaller annual diversion, and reduced maximum instantaneous pumping rate and the current river management requirements. Further, as noted again by Mr. Nicely, The Stetson memo number 6 modeled anticipated drawdowns at well site B under conservative dry period conditions. As he noted, this would result in a maximum drawdown of 9.1 feet at a distance of 1,000 feet upstream of well site B in year 2 of continuous pumping, assuming no other wells or other inflows to the area. The addendum, again, based on the analysis of GSI and described by Mr. Nicely, found that the anticipated drawdown from the River Wells project would be less than that modeled by Stetson number 6. As such, Stetson number 6 demonstrated that placing all the wells downstream of Alisal Bridge would result in higher flows at Alisal Bridge when compared with situating new wells upstream of Alisal Bridge, assuming the same level of diversion. The addendum found that adding only 2 new wells in well site B with a maximum annual diversion of 1,368 acre-feet per year and a maximum instantaneous rate of diversion of 2.84 CFS would result in even less effect on the river conditions than the original project. Stetson 6, and supported again by the work completed by GSI, concluded that modeling 2,400 acre-feet diversion under alternative GW5 with all the wells downstream of the Alisal Bridge in well site B would result in increased water releases under water order 8918 of 183 acre-feet under this alternative as shown in table 17 of that memo, compared with water right releases with the baseline flow of 1,053 acre-feet under alternative GW4. The certified final EIR, based on Stetson number 6, found Kachuma project water shortages for its South Coast members occur during droughts due to increased water rights under 8918 in target fish flow releases, which are directly related to the level of dewatered storage in the Santa Ynez River alluvium, from which the city and other downstream water pumpers divert. Based on the Stetson number 6 analysis, while in critical dry and drought periods, there would be shortages in supply from the Kachuma project to its member units, there would be shortages in water supply from the Kachuma project to its member units. But as noted in the certified final EIR, Stetson determined that the River Wells project would result in similar water supplies within Lake Kachuma compared to baseline conditions, and shortages would still occur with or without the implementation of the River Wells project. Finally, it notes that the Kachuma project members share in any shortages. In its cumulative analysis of the River Wells project, the addendum also found during critical dry and drought periods, shortages would occur in water supply from the Kachuma project to member units, but that impacts due to river well projects would not result in increased impacts, and cumulative impacts of the River Wells project would be less than significant. Further, the addendum notes that Water Order 290148 requires more releases in accordance with the 2000 biological opinion than prior water rights orders. This means that this means the city's even smaller diversion of 1,368 acre-feet would be occurring under conditions with these release requirements. Can we go to slide 17, please? Both the certified final EIR and the addendum considered impacts to biological resources, including steelhead and other fish. Potential operational impacts to fishery resources from the river are primarily related to changes in surface flows and drawdown. We are cognizant of the 2005 biological opinion that designates 5 evolutionary significant units, ESUs, of steelhead as critical habitat, including the Santa Ynez River. The certified final EIR used the 2000 biological opinion in characterizing fish habitat in the Santa Ynez River, as it provided more detailed habitat condition than the 2005 biological opinion. As noted in the 2000 biological opinion, quote, steelhead appeared to persist in the mainstream from 0 to 10 miles downstream of Bradbury Dam over the summers of some of the years observed. In other years, steelhead may not have survived, or poor visibility conditions may have prevented observation. Steelhead have been occasionally observed further downstream. In the late 90s, a few adults were observed approximately 15 miles downstream of the dam. And even later in the 90s, a few adults were observed as far as 20 miles downstream of the dam. The 2000 biological opinion also notes, quote, the majority of the mainstream serves as migration habitat in NIMS judgment, although as noted in the paragraph I just read, rearing and some spawning habitat takes place in the first 10 miles below the dam. Conditions in this area are often poor for rearing or spawning. As example, cover and pool habitats are sparse. In addition, we are aware of other studies, including the 2019 buyout for the Southern California steelhead, studies completed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for their 2021 biological assessment, and as I noted, the draft 2016 buyout by NIMS, which has never been finalized. As previously noted, the hydrological analysis for the certified final EIR as part of Stetson 6 demonstrated that even assuming a diversion of 2,400 acre-feet per year in very dry conditions, the subsurface levels and surface water flows would remain within historical groundwater levels and similar to surface water flows present under baseline conditions. This presents a conservative analysis of the original project, which proposed 1,980 acre-feet diversion. The certified EIR concluded that the original project would not trigger additional fishery releases to maintain flows in the critical habitat management areas above Palisol Bridge, and that the original project would not significantly alter winter flows, but that additional water rights releases may be required during drought events. As demonstrated in the addendum, the Rivers Wells project does not change the river mechanics or operational requirements for the river. It would result in even smaller operational impacts, as explained by Mr. Nicely in his testimony. The River Wells project only proposes an annual diversion of 1,368 feet, which is much less than what was considered in the final EIR. The Rivers Wells project only considers 2 wells with a maximum pumping rate of 2.84 CFS, which also includes the upstream well number 3. Mr. Nicely and GSI concluded on these factors: that locating 2 wells in well site B will result in even less effects on subsurface water levels, surface flow rates, and water storage as compared to the original project. Again, as explained by Mr. Nicely, this means that the revised River Wells project will have even less of a potential impact to fish species than the original project, because localized drawdown will be less than 10 at each well due to alluvial conditions at well site B. Based on this, the certified EIR found that the impacts to fish species would be less than significant with mitigation. Can we go to slide 21, please? With regards to terrestrial resources, the certified final EIR and the addendum evaluated potential impacts to terrestrial biological resources, including during construction of the project, such as the potential for the project to displace individuals, destroy habitat, or result in direct loss of species, and during operation of the project, such as potential changes in subsurface water levels and surface flow. Specifically, with regards to sensitive species, including the southwest willow flycatcher, least Bell's vireo, and southwestern pond turtle. The biologist review, as part of the addendum, evaluated well site B and its immediate surrounding area for suitable habitat and the potential for these species to occur on site. The addendum noted that the addendum notes that the southwestern willow flycatcher and least Bell's vireo are not expected to nest on site within well site B because existing riparian habitat vegetation located in a small band along the river and a small remnant in the proposed well site B are not extensive enough to support breeding habitat for these species. The addendum further notes that more extensive riparian habitat is more suitable for these species, does occur approximately 1.3 miles downstream from well site B, which is well outside the project area. The addendum notes that for both the least Bell's vireo and southwest willow flycatcher, neither are expected to nest on site because the existing riparian habitat vegetation located near proposed well site B is not extensive enough to support breeding. Ultimately, the certified final EIR in the addendum found that impacts to biological resources would be less than significant or less than significant with implementation of mitigation. The addendum made the same determination. Can we go to slide 23, please? To summarize, the city's CEQA documentation, both the certified final EIR and the addendum, provide the appropriate documentation of the River Wells project's potential impact on fish, wildlife, in-stream beneficial uses, and public trust. The certified final EIR addressed the public trust resources identified, included fisheries, terrestrial resources, water, and recreation. The addendum analysis demonstrates that these findings of the certified final EIR are still applicable to the River Wells project, and that the mitigation identified in the certified final EIR still addresses all potentially significant impacts from the River Wells project. Further, Water Order 2019-0148 was issued after the certified final EIR was finalized. However, the environmental effects of that order were evaluated in the 2011 Kachuma final EIR. The certified final EIR for the Solvang project considered the 2011 Kachuma final EIR as part of the Solvang original project analysis. Can we go to slide 24, please? The city's CEQA documentation also demonstrates that the public trust is protected where feasible through the design of the river wells and mitigation measures. The River Wells project locates the proposed new river wells in an area that is better able to accommodate the proposed pumping with less drawdown and surface flow interaction due to the alluvial characteristics of well site B and fewer nearby wells. The River Wells project also proposes a smaller diversion at a lower rate than originally proposed that is consistent with the historical maximums under the city's current water right permit. Based on the city's CEQA analysis, there is no evidence that the river wells will cause take under either the federal or California Endangered Species Act. Further, the city's proposed permit includes the State Water Resources Control Board standard permit term that the water right authorized under the city's water right permit does not authorize any act which would result in the taking of a candidate threatened or endangered species, either under the federal or state law. Can we go to slide 25, please? The city determined that the addendum to the certified final EIR is the appropriate environmental documentation pursuant to CEQA because consistent with the requirements in the CEQA guidelines, section 15164, quote, none of the conditions in section 162 calling for the preparation of a subsequent EIR have occurred, unquote. The addendum provides an update to all the information in the certified final EIR to analyze the impacts of the river wells under current conditions and presented a comparison of the environmental impacts of the original river wells project to the revised project. Slide 26. In conclusion, the city's CEQA documentation is sufficient to allow the State Water Resources Control Board to make the necessary findings under CEQA guidelines 15091 and 15093 and take action on the city's petition. The city's certified final EIR acknowledged the State Water Board's comment letter on that EIR and revised the EIR requested accordingly. The city certified the final EIR in 2014 and filed a notice of determination on February 25th, 2014. Therefore, the statute of limitations of 30 days after that date has long passed. The State Water Board nor any other party did not and has not brought any legal challenge to the certified EIR. The certified final EIR and addendum and the respective appendices provide substantial evidence in the record to support the board's finding under CEQA guidelines 15091. Based on the foregoing, it is my opinion as a CEQA expert that the certified final EIR and the addendum are sufficient for the State Water Resources Control Board to rely as a responsible agency, and no further environmental review is required. Thank you for this opportunity to present.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. With that, I will turn to the parties in the usual order. I will first turn to the parent district. Do you have any questions for Mr. Gibson?
We do not.
Thank you. And ID number 1.
We do not.
All Guest Ranch.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And I will turn to you, Mr. Bivens. Does CCRB have questions for this witness?
I do have a few. Thank you, Ms. Kenzie.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Mr. Gibson. Let's have, we have Ms. Mullen today. Ms. Mullen, can I have exhibit Solvang 4, please? And if I could have page 18, please, Ms. Mullen. And I think the PDF pages are the same as the, yes. And if we could scroll down to paragraph 36. I'm just going to look at the first sentence here. Mr. Gibson, you've characterized the certified FEIR as finding that Kachuma project water shortages for its South Coast members occur during droughts due to increased water rights and fish water releases, which are directly related to the level of dewatered storage in the Santa Ynez River alluvium, from which the city and other downstream pumpers divert water. Do you stand by that characterization of the certified FEIR?
You do?
Okay. Let's have Solvang 19, please, Ms. Mullen. And if we could have PDF page 32, please. Scroll down, I'm going to look at the last sentence. See it, okay. So Mr. Gibson, after the semicolon in that last sentence, the document states, in general, there is more total dewatered storage when the city's river well pumping increases. You don't disagree with that general statement, do you?
I'm looking for it. I'm in the very last paragraph or the,
Very bottom of the page, and the last sentence right after the semicolon.
no, I do not disagree with that statement.
Okay. And let's go to the next page, please, Ms. Mullen. I'm going to look at the first sentence in the last paragraph.
I think we need to go to the last paragraph. Is that right, Mr. Bivens?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's the first sentence in the last paragraph.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen.
And so here, this first sentence in the last paragraph reads, the increase in the amount of pumping from the San Ynez River would occur primarily during the summer months. And you don't disagree with that statement either, do you, Mr. Gibson?
I do not.
Okay. Do you happen to know whether there was typically flow in the San Ynez River in the vicinity of Solvang during summer months prior to construction of the Kachuma project in dry years?
Prior to the construction of the Kachuma project,
Yes. Summer months.
I do not have any recollection of that information prior to the construction of the Kachuma project.
Okay, that wasn't something that the city of Solvang analyzed in its CEQA documents as a part of the River Wells project, correct?
No, I mean, the Kachuma project's been in place for decades, so I don't know why we would analyze that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibson. And so I guess, I think I know the answer to my next question, but has Solvang quantified the amount of water that would have historically been available in the absence of the Kachuma project to supply Solvang's increased diversions relative to the 1,053 acre-feet per year baseline?
I do not know if they have or not. That would be before my time.
That wasn't something that was analyzed in your CEQA document, correct?
No, we did not analyze it.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to PDF page, let's see, 34, please. I'm going to look at the last sentence of the first full paragraph. Actually, no, you know what? Let's go to PDF page 41, please, Ms. Mullen. I apologize. I'm going to look at the bottom of the page. There's a paragraph with the heading water supply. And so, Mr. Gibson, the first two sentences of this paragraph read, critical dry and drought periods would result in shortages in water supply from the Kachuma project to member units. The approved project was determined to result in similar water supplies within Lake Kachuma compared to baseline conditions in the certified FER. Is that right?
And that's correct, and that's consistent with my testimony I just provided.
Yes, and to be clear, by similar, you don't mean exactly the same, correct?
Well, if I meant exactly the same, I would have said exactly the same. So no, I do not mean exactly the same.
And then goes on to say, two sentences down, the certified FEIR stated as approved project level impacts would be reduced to less than significant levels with implementation of mitigation measure HYD-1. Cumulative water supply impacts would be considered less than significant with incorporation of this mitigation measure. Is that right?
That's what it says.
And then it goes on to say that the certified FEIR determined it may be possible to implement additional drought contingency measures identified as part of the member unit's urban water supply contingency analysis in order to make up for a temporary water supply shortage in a critical drought year or period. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
And Solvang is not a member unit, correct?
That is my understanding.
So this FEIR is suggesting that South Coast member units of the Kachuma project should implement additional conservation measures to make up for the impacts of Solvang's project?
I don't think it's saying that at all. I think it says that there may be additional drought contingency contingency measures available to measure member units as part of their urban water supply analysis. They are required, each of those members are required to conduct their own urban water supply analysis. And under SBX 7 and other legislation through the state and the water board, and there's a number of, and you're most probably aware of this, a number of measures that are continuing to be implemented by the state and to agencies to improve conservation and drought contingency requirements. So
sure, but just to be clear, Mr. Gibson, it would be the member units and not Solvang who would need to implement those conservation measures, correct?
Solvang would probably, if they're stipulated by the state, would be required to do the same thing.
Okay, do you know whether Solvang is required to do that?
It would depend on what the measures are and what the requirements are.
Okay, but in this sentence, the additional drought contingency measures identified as part of the member unit's urban water supply contingency analysis, those are conservation measures that the member units would be implementing, correct?
Well, again, as the statement says, it may be possible for them. It doesn't say they would be required to.
Okay, but you're not, this statement also isn't suggesting that Solvang is going to implement those conservation measures. Is that right?
Solvang would be required to implement what it needs to implement as well as any other water agency would. So, I think the statement says what it says, that it may be possible to look at additional drought contingency measures. So, as part of their urban water supply analysis.
Okay, fair enough, Mr. Gibson. Let's look at mitigation measure HYD1. Ms. Mullen, that's on PDF page 73. And Mr. Gibson, mitigation measure HYD1 is at the top of the page there. Do you see that?
I see it. Yes, I do.
And it requires the Water Division of Solvang's Public Works Department to advertise, promote, and implement their water management program to conserve water, reduce consumption, and the need for water pumping during summer and fall and during droughts. Is that right?
What it says.
And has Solvang quantified the amount of water that will be conserved by that mitigation measure?
I'm not in a position to answer that. You would have to ask somebody in the city to answer that.
Okay, so that's not quantified in this CEQA document, correct?
At this time, it was not quantified as to what that would be. So,
all right. And is there any guarantee that implementing the program will result in a reduced need for pumping water from the River Wells project in the summer and fall and during droughts?
can you restate the question again?
Sure. Is there anything that guarantees that the implementation of the program identified in mitigation measure HYD-1 will actually result in a reduced need for pumping water from the River Wells project in the summer and fall and during droughts?
Well, I would never use the word guarantee. So no, if you're going to want to guarantee, the answer is no. Is it highly likely and probable? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibson. Is there any mitigation measure or other condition associated with the River Wells project that would require Solvang to limit its diversions under permit 15878 to an average of 650 acre-feet per year?
Are there any other conditions that would require the city to limit its average diversion to what rate?
650 acre-feet per year.
And where's the 658 coming from?
Well, it's coming from some statements that Mr. Nicely made yesterday. but I don't know that it matters.
Well,
I
the 658 is half of the 13. I mean, I know where the number comes from. Just two wells divided by the 1364. So there's nothing in this document because I think Mr. Nicely explained that in his testimony how that number developed. So
nothing in this document that requires a limitation of pumping to that 650 acre feet per year long-term average.
that's not in the city's application, and that was, I think Ms. O'Sullivan mentioned that earlier today that there was no stipulations in the application for any limitations on any other than to stay within what the application is requiring, the 1360, 68 or 64, I can't remember.
Sure. Okay. And then is there any mitigation measure or other condition on the River Wells project that would prohibit Solvang from diverting water when water from the unregulated flow of the Santa Ynez River would not have been available?
I believe there may be some biological mitigation measures related to that. I'd have to go back and refer to that again, but right now, without having all the mitigation measures in front of me, I would have to look that up.
Fair enough. So at least at this point, you're not aware of any mitigation measure or other conditions like the one I described, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now and we got this some of this from Mr. Nicely, but I just want to make sure we have a clear record in developing this addendum to the certified FEIR. Solvang did not update the modeling analysis in Stetson Technical Memorandum number 6 of the effects of the River Wells project on Kachuma project operations, correct?
The city retained GSI to provide that analysis. Stetson was not available to the city, is my understanding, to update that memo.
Okay, so the GSI analysis of that memo is the only additional analysis that the city conducted on Kachuma project operations after the adoption of Order 2019-148, correct?
For the purposes of this addendum, that's all I am aware of.
Okay, and the analysis that GSI conducted for purposes of this addendum took the impacts on the Kachuma project that were described in Stetson Technical Memorandum number 6, and then determined that the revised project would not make them worse, correct?
Well, that's another way of saying that they would be less, correct?
Okay, so there was no additional modeling that was done to verify that conclusion, correct?
I think that question was asked and answered by Mr. Nicely, but yeah, the work that GSI done, they did not do any additional modeling that I was aware of. The models that are available, the Santa Ynez River hydrological model was not available to the city to do additional modeling, of the river itself, nor was the river flow. So again, I think Mr. Nicely spoke to that, and I think that was asked and answered.
And Mr. Gibson, the analysis that was actually I think I have two more questions. The analysis that was done by GSI for the addendum assumed that the impacts that were described in Tech Memo number 6 were correct. Is that right?
Well, on the validity of Tech Memo number 6, yes. Tech Memo number 6 was also part of the certified final EIR and included as appendices to that. There were no comments or challenges to that memo. So I think on foundation, that assumption is a strong assumption to make.
Okay. Thanks for that. Why, just out of curiosity, why wasn't the Sandy Nice River hydrology model available to Solvang in connection with the development of the addendum?
I'm not able to speak to that. I have no clue.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. It's 11:53. I guess I will turn to whichever of you would like to go first, but our normal practice has been CDFW. So Ms. Germanario or Mr. Puccini.
Ms. Ken, I was actually going to start this time. We're
Okay.
jumping around in the order a little bit, mix it up.
Okay, that sounds great. Ms. Beal, do you think, do you have a guesstimate of how long you think you'll be asking questions?
Yeah, my guesstimate is 20 minutes.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started with you, and then we'll see if we may want to break after that, I think, for lunch.
Okay.
So go ahead, Ms.
Okay.
Beal. Thank you.
Ms. Mullen, I'm going to primarily focus on asking Mr. Gibson some questions about his testimony. But I also have just a couple of the NIMS exhibits that I will also ask that you kindly pull up at the appropriate time. So if we want to start with Gibson is Solvang number 4. Hello, Mr. Gibson. My name is Lori Beal, and I'm an attorney for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So nice to meet you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I'll try to keep my questions concise. If you don't understand any part of my question, please let me know. Otherwise, I was going to start the PDF page 6 to 7, so the bottom of page 6. I had a couple questions about that paragraph 10. So paragraph 10 is your statement that the board's approval of the petition would not unreasonably affect any fish or wildlife. I assume that you intend that statement to include steelhead. Is that correct?
It's inclusive of steelheads. That is correct.
Okay. And if you could kindly scroll down just a little bit, Ms. Mullen, so we can see that rest of that paragraph on the next page. So you also state that the evidence in the record does not indicate that the river wells will cause any take to protected species. Is that your testimony?
That's my testimony.
How are you defining take in that in that statement?
Well, I think as you're well aware, you know how the definition of take works. So it's it's a broad definition that would include, physical take as well as potential harm to the habitat or the species.
Okay. And you're not here testifying as a biologist. You already said that, correct?
I said that I am not a biologist.
So in providing your opinion that the evidence in the record does not indicate the project will result in take, what are you relying on exactly?
Well, as the principal investigator and lead author on this, I rely on a team of professionals who do have expertise in these fields that either do the work directly, peer review the work, have extensive experience in the work, and collaborate on the work. So it's not one person that tries to complete everything on here. As I indicated also, even though I've got a background in hydrology, I don't try to do all the hydrology work. So collectively, our team of professionals, which includes fisheries biologists, reach these conclusions.
So which fishery biologists did you rely on specifically in reaching these conclusions?
I believe the parties that were involved identified in the preparers and organizations consulted in the addendum They include fisheries biologists with other organizations and companies. Meridian does not employ any fisheries biologists. Would employ any biologists, but so
Could you
I
be
think
a little more specific on which biologists you're relying on here?
I would have to reference the document, like I said, if we want to. I don't know if somebody wants to pull up the addendum, we can see who the preparers and
Okay,
organizations
let's do that.
consulting were.
I think it would be good to clarify. Let's go ahead and do that. So the addendum is Solvang, is it 19? Well, you're directing us here, Mr. Gibson, so you let us know
So
which.
I think in the very back, I'd have to look at the table of contents. In the very back, there should be a section called preparers and organizations consulted. I don't know what page it would be. So
Did you say preparers? Maybe we can do a,
it's preparers and organizations consulted. It's usually section 7, 8, or 9, something in the back.
there we go.
So there we have Robertson Bryan Inc., Fisheries Biology Resources, Keith Whitner and Michelle Brown.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And did they provide written materials to you that are included in part of Solvang's record for this matter?
When you say provide written material as part of the record, we collaborated with them. We exchanged information in draft form. We collaborated and did that. So the final documentation represents their opinion as well as their input.
All right, but do you have any specific documentation that would allow us to understand exactly what information they provided to you and what opinions they provided?
It would have been in draft form in working document, and so no, it would, everything presented in the addendum represents all the work.
Okay, thank you. I want to switch gears for just a moment, and if we could pull up NIMS 19 and take a quick look at that. Thank you. And if you could just scroll down, I think it's toward the, well, first, let me see if you recognize this document, or at least if you could describe what it is to us, Mr. Gibson.
From the at the top, it looks like it's a letter from NIMS to the city of Solvang.
Okay. And then if you go down, if we could scroll down just a little bit here, do you see that this is a letter with comments on the draft environmental impact report? Would you agree with that?
That's what it says. Well, actually, it says comments on the notice of availability in the draft.
Mm-hmm. And then if we could just scroll down to the second page, and I'm going to ask if you could read that first sentence on the second page when we get there.
Starting with additionally.
Yes, please.
Additionally, any activity that reduces the amount and extent of surface flow in the Santa Ynez River has the potential to adversely affect endangered steelhead, which, if not already authorized in accordance with the U.S. Endangered Species Act, is prohibited.
Does this information change in any way your testimony that the evidence in the record does not indicate that the wells would result in any take?
Not at all.
Why not?
Because I think, as the evidence in the record suggests, that the hydrology analysis, that the activity that would result from the city's pumping and withdrawal of the wells would not reduce the amount and extent of surface flow in the Santa Ynez River.
Are you aware that the city's addendum, the GSI report, did find that there would be reductions in flows based on the conservative assumptions made in that report?
But they also determined it would be less than significant. as far as a hydrology standpoint.
And when they were using the word significant, were they defining that term as it applies under CEQA?
Yeah, there is no bright line with that term. If you're familiar with the guidelines and the CEQA thresholds, there is no bright line as to what significant is. It's a judgment line in the professional opinion of the engineers that completed that report. It was their professional opinion and judgment that it was not significant.
Did any of the experts that you consulted with or retained for purposes of the EIR advise you that according to the calculations and estimates provided in the addendum GSI report, did they advise you that based on that information, there would be no significant effects to steelhead or critical habitat?
They concurred with the opinions that we reached.
Is that concurrence documented in the record somewhere?
Well, it's, as I indicated before, it's in the it's the materials in the addendum, and that was a collaboration effort. So,
okay. So we'll go back to your testimony. So we're looking back at Solvang 4. Just where we left off, we were going over paragraph 10. So this is the top of the PDF, page 7. You state that the board's approval of Solvang's petition would comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. Is that correct?
that's what it says.
And what is your opinion that it would comply with the Endangered Species Act based on?
That it would comply with the Endangered Species Act and the provisions stated therein, and that there would not be any substantial harm, interference, take, or otherwise to the habitat or the species under consideration.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to again ask to look at another NIMS exhibit. It's NIMS 23. And if we could look at paragraph 6, that's page 4 of the PDF. Are you familiar with this document, Mr. Gibson?
I'm not sure what the document. I can see what the title came up.
This is rebuttal testimony submitted by biologist Richard Bush, who's employed by the National Marine Fisheries Service. Do you recollect if you've reviewed this document?
I probably have.
Okay. So at paragraph 6, if we could look at the second sentence, Mr. Bush says, in reality, the available information indicates that Solvang's proposal, when implemented, would reduce the amount and extent of surface flow through a portion of the main stem Santa Ynez River. Do you see that?
I see that.
Are you aware that Mr. Bush is an experienced fishery biologist with expertise in steelhead ecology?
Well, I think his credentials said that.
Yeah. Do you disagree with Mr. Bush's opinion?
Well, Mr. Bush's opinion is not, the statement here provides no supplemental information or fact to support the statement, so I can't disagree or agree with it.
Okay. And then if we could scroll down on the same PDF, so this is PDF page 5, and I'm looking at paragraph 11. And then before we follow up on that, you already testified that you relied on the 2000 biological opinion for the Kachuma project in your FEIR. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah. And are you aware that NIMS has determined that that biological opinion needs to be reinitiated and revised for various reasons?
Well, they may have said that. They indicated that in other testimony before that I was participating to, but they provided no evidence or any findings that are published as to why that is. So right now, that's all we have to rely on.
Were you aware that the need for the reinitiation was in part because some of the assumptions underlying the 2000 biological opinion have proven faulty?
Well, again, they've not published any information stating their arguments, so it's hard to agree or disagree with what those opinions are.
Okay. So if we look at paragraph 11, and then we could scroll down a little bit. If we could go down to the next page. So Mr. Bush is citing a series of technical memoranda published by NIMS that NIMS believes are relevant to Santa Ynez population of steelhead. Have you reviewed any of those documents?
I'm not a fisheries biologist, so I probably have not reviewed them.
Do you know whether any of these documents were referenced in your final EIR or your addendum?
I have no recollection. I can't speak to that.
Okay. And I am almost finished, so mindful of everyone wanting lunch. And if you wouldn't mind just going back one last time to Mr. Gibson's testimony, if we could go to page 15 of the PDF. So we're looking at paragraph 31, and the third sentence there, let's see.
Pick a line number.
Yeah, I believe you say here around line 16 that pumping by others in the Santa Ynez River was not included in Solvang's analysis. So that's correct?
It says pumping by others in the reach of the river alluvium below the Alisal Bridge was not included in the analysis. And it gives a couple of reasons why.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how much additional pumping occurs between Alisal Bridge and Lompoc?
There's a number of other wells and water rights holders along that stretch of the river. When we did the Kachuma final EIR and we had access to the Santa Ynez River model at that point in time in 2012, I probably had an idea as to what that was. Because we don't have that information right now and it's outside of the study area, as indicated by Mr. Nicely in his testimony. It was beyond the scope of our analysis.
So was your assumption that there was no additional pumping occurring below Alisal Bridge?
That's not what it says.
Or what was your assumption?
It says pumping by others was not included. It didn't say there was no other pumping by others.
I understand, but when you're saying it was not included, are you meaning?
Okay, well, if you read the rationale in here, okay, it says A, the location and annual pumping is unknown. So if it's unknown and difficult to estimate, you can't include it. And okay, so that's the first rationale there. So to include it in any analysis, and as I indicated, it's beyond the scope, you would have to know what it is. So if it's unknown, you can't include it. And if you can't
I believe you answered my question. I was just asking to clarify that pumping by others was assumed to be zero.
No, we didn't assume. Well, it was not included. Okay.
If it was not included,
I did not make a statement that it was assumed to be zero. Pumping by others in the reach of the Santa was not included. Okay. So you can reach whatever conclusion you want to reach from that. All right.
Did you make an assumption about how much pumping was occurring by other?
I didn't make the assumptions. The analysis was done by hydrologists and hydrogeologists through GSI and Stetson. So I would have to look at what assumptions they made. That's beyond the scope of my expertise for this.
If it's beyond, okay, fine. That's great. Thank you. So paragraph 37, and that's page 19 of the PDF. So the last sentence, you state that locating the city's new wells at Site B avoids upstream areas with established flow targets and critical management areas for steelhead, correct?
Line number, please. You say the last sentence.
Well,
line
maybe,
number 10 and 11.
I was asking what flow targets you're referring to in that sentence.
And let me read the sentence here. So find out where it begins. As explained by GSI, locating the wells downstream of the Alisal River project, analyze the addendum more evenly distributes the pumping from the river alluvium, reducing the effects of the city's pumping on nearby wells, in particular those of Alisal Range and ID1, and avoids areas upstream of the Alisal Bridge with established flow targets and critical management areas under the 2000 biological opinion. So can you repeat your question now that I've read the sentence?
So what specific flow targets are you referring to in that sentence?
Well, there's two sets of targets. There, if you're familiar with 8918, okay, there are certain types of releases that come out of Bradbury Dam. There are fish releases and there are releases, flow targets for downstream water rights. So those releases are stipulated in 8918 and have been reinforced through other water orders by the Water Board. So those are not assumptions we made. Those are targets that were established by the Water Board and are in place. So in the 2000 biological opinion, and subsequent to that in 29-148 in term 18 plan, those water targets have been established. If you want to look at what was included in the Stetson memo, then I would ask you to call up Stetson 6 and look at table 4 of that memo, and you can see what the flow targets are. Can we have that memo, please? I don't know what number that was.
I'm not asking you to pull that up.
No, you asked me if I wanted what the flow targets were, so I'm answering the question. So, either you want an answer or you don't.
Mr. Gibson, I think I understood the question was just to clarify what you understood the flow targets to be, and I think you made a very clear answer. So if Ms. Beal doesn't need that exhibit, I don't think we need to go there.
All right, so.
Thank you.
And in that sentence, what do you mean when you refer to critical management areas for Steelhead? What do you understand that to mean?
Well, as we identified before, the Santa Ynez River, in accordance with the 2005 biological opinion that identified different ESUs along the Central Coast, identified the entire Santa Ynez River as critical habitat. In addition to that, the 2000 biological opinion, whether you considered it flawed or not, identified areas downstream of Bradbury Dam, more specifically than were articulated in the 2005 BIOP, that identified management areas that were of concern downstream of the dam. So that's what we refer to.
Okay. Do you know whether the 2016 draft biological opinion identified the same flow targets as the 2000 opinion?
I can't recall off the top of my head. And again, that's a draft working paper, so it's not been published. So I can't speak to it.
So if we could go to PDF page 23, and we're going to the bottom of that page. So you have a citation here that's from a Bureau of Reclamation biological assessment. Is that correct?
Line 13.
Yes.
Paragraph 40, yes.
And then if we go a little further down, let me find the correct line number. We could scroll down just a bit there. And then, so line 26, there have not been any observed changes in the movement or number of steelhead resulting from replenished groundwater extractions. Do you see that?
Correct, it's includes.
Do you know whether the National Marine Fishery Service agreed with the Bureau of Reclamation's assessment that there have not been any observed changes in the movement or numbers of steelhead resulting from replenished groundwater extractions?
I'm not privy to any agreement or disagreement by NIMS and Bureau Rec. All I am aware of is that there is no longer a reconsultation effort going on in the Bureau Rec suspended that.
Okay. Do you know what type of monitoring the Bureau of Reclamation carried out to inform that statement that you quote here?
Well, the Bureau works with Combs and CCRB and does, extensive monitoring up and down the river. It's well documented in the BA, the 2021 BA, as well as all of the annual monitoring reports done by CCRB and Combs along the river that include a variety of fish counts, catches, observations, etc. So extensive amount of documentation exists.
Do you know whether the National Marine Fisheries Service approved the Bureau's monitoring plan?
I'm not privy to that. As like I said, as far as I'm aware, National Marine Fisheries Service and Bureau Rec have suspended or terminated reconsultation efforts.
If we could go down, this is my last question. Paragraph 49, which is PDF page 25. I'm looking for the third sentence in there. So this is line, let's see, and we're referring to the Stetson memorandum here. So around line 7, the Stetson technical memo 6 specifically found that locating the new wells downstream of Alisal Bridge, and you quote here, mitigate impacts to endangered steelhead by locating the wells away from the critical management areas identified in the 2000 biological opinion. Is that your testimony?
Well, that's information identified by Stetson in their 6, and that's in my testimony. That is correct.
Are you aware if Stetson consulted with a fish biologist in making that statement?
Well, at the time Stetson 6 was completed, I am aware that they were in consultation with fisheries biologists at CCRB and other places and Bureau Rec. The extent of those consultations and conversations, I don't have details on, but yes, there was extensive work at that point in time. I was involved with Stetson. I was involved with CCRB. I was involved with Bureau Rec because I prepared the final EIR in 2012 to Kajima Branch.
So I'm specifically focusing on line 9, your statement that moving the project downstream will fully mitigate impacts to steelhead, or mitigate impacts to steelhead.
Yeah, it does not say that. It says mitigate, quote, mitigate impacts to steelhead.
Yes, and what I was asking is which biologists Stetson consulted with in reaching that conclusion.
Like I said, I don't know. I know there were conversations. I know there were biologists at CCRB. I know there were biologists at Bureau Rec. Okay, so which ones they specifically spoke to, I'm not privy to. I can't answer that question.
Okay, are you familiar with the habitat conditions in the reach below Alisal and above Lompoc?
A little bit, yeah.
Are you able to testify as to the relative value of the habitat above Alisal compared with the habitat below Alisal?
Well, since I'm not a fisheries biologist, I'm not going to try to answer that question.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Beal, and thank you, Mr. Gibson. I think at this point we should break for lunch. I don't want to do unless there are vigorous objections, I don't think we should do a full hour because I'd like to get back to it, but I do want to give us a reasonable amount of time. I'll tell you tomorrow, though, because we have a short day, I am planning to hold us to a half hour for lunch, so plan accordingly. You may want to bring a lunch from home or something like that. 11:22, let's come back at 1:10 and we'll pick up with any questions from the other fisheries entities for Mr. Gibson. If you will log out from Zoom and log back in after lunch, that would be helpful. Thank you. And we'll see you then.
Thank you.